his insecurities will probably never fully go away, like 500%. And so he has to try and figure out different ways to kind of compensate for them and get rid of them. It's kind of like when you take too much of one medicine, your body kind of becomes immune to it, and then you have to try a different one. So same concept. So, Trench was like, I'm fed up with what Blurryface is doing to me. I'm fed up with all this kind of stuff. Like, I'm fed up with Dima. So I'm going to take some time to, go in this like little in-between place, Trench, to try and figure out where I want to be eventually. And to try and get to that place.
All right. So what comes after Dima? And what comes after Clancy and everything that Clancy had told us? So Clancy gave us one last update on DMA.org, January 22nd, 2019. And this is when the Chlorine music video came out. In this letter, Clancy talks about how he regretted leaving Dima, and to him, Dima was home. Something that's also discussed in this letter is Keon's and how Keon's gives things for in return to trust, and that's kind of, we're going back to like what Carr said. Keon's went up to Clancy and grabbed Clancy's face and said, "Clancy, my child, let's go home." And by giving Clancy that sense of home, when Clancy is out in a place that's so foreign to him, and he has no idea what Trench is, and he doesn't know anybody out in Dima, and he's not familiar with anything, it was exactly what he needed to come home to Dima, which, as we know, isn't a good place to be. Clancy then went radio silent, and there were no changes to DMA.org up until April 2nd, 2021, which, again, if you remember the date, was the day that Blurryface tweeted, "Blue is a sign of defeat."
Okay, and so the new colors they chose are blue, and that's when they were announcing that whole thing. All right, so now I was making fun of the fact that it's Dima propaganda, right? But now I actually see and believe and understand that that's not just like something this, just because it sounds a little goofy to me as an outsider, doesn't mean it's not actually some legitimacy to it. And understanding like the background to it, there's more, that there's more to be unfolded about how maybe this is about how Tyler's like giving in, maybe.
And we'll kind of get into that more. So before we move on, there was a thing called the Level of Concern alternate reality game. And throughout the Level of Concern reality game, you were sent on a hunt to find codes, and when you entered the codes into the website, it gave you gifts. And and the gifts were pictures, videos, behind the scenes stuff, things like that. And if you completed the ARG first, you got a little USB that had extra stuff on it. And on the USB, there was a video of Tyler, and in the back there was a TV that spelt out "Clancy is dead" in 21 Pilots language. So keep that in mind for where we're going next, so it doesn't seem like we're just grabbing stuff out of thin air. Because that was a huge component to where we're going next in the narrative. So April 2nd, 2021. On April 2nd, 2021, the website was active again. The website was updated with a termination bar, implying that all the updates on the website would be wiped. So a suggested theory was that the bishops had found Clancy and discovered the website, and this resulted in Clancy dying and the website being leaked. This was confirmed by the Blurryface Twitter account, who broke his 4-year hiatus by liking this tweet. And that is my tweet!
Hey!
So Blurryface came out of his 4-year hiatus to tell me I was right.
Hey! Round of applause. That is quite impressive, I gotta say.
Yeah, it was, and I have to say this. I couldn't have done it without Cars. I really couldn't have. Cars. It's literally both of. I say it's our notice because it's.
Yeah, but it was also liked within an hour. That is.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was quick.
Yeah. So the idea was, this is just kind of like talk on Twitter. So Carson and I have been very involved in the narrative for a very long time, and when you're involved in the narrative, you start to become watched in a sense. Um, and when things with the narrative happen, they do pay attention to what those people are saying. I believe it was actually just 17 minutes that that tweet was up, and then it was liked by Blurryface.
Wow.
So they were watching. So it's very cool, and I'm very honored. So but it was confirmation that um, Clancy, as far as we know, is dead. And something I want to talk about is smearing, because that's not something that is really talked about a lot, and it's not even a widely known concept. So smearing is when you leave Dima and you get caught and you're brought back, you're labeled as an FPE. And that means a failed perimeter escape. You tried to leave and you didn't succeed, so now you're back and you failed. And that is used to outcast people who leave Dima. And you kind of have to wear this badge, but people wear it proudly in Dima, and that's something that's been talked about. And something that they try to do is they try to make you forget everything you saw out in Trench. The color, the greenery, the people, the banditos, the help, the hope. They try to make you forget all of it. So they kind of try to strip you from those memories. And so when I say that the bishops found Clancy, we can assume that Keons took Clancy back to Dima and tried to smear him, and in the process he protested. He was like, I regret it, I wish I wasn't home, I want to go back out to Trench. And in turn they pressured him a little bit more, and then they found out about the website, and when they took that away from him and stuff, Clancy committed to vialism completely, and ultimately Clancy died. Which
so wait,
is...
does that mean Clancy took his own life, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So the reasoning why we think that happened, well, if you remember when we go back to the beginning of DMA.org, the violation code, nobody can know about this at all, they said, for the sake of others' survival. So
do you fear that your life is going to be threatened for all the information you know?
It's been a huge joke. It's funny that you say that, because like people joke about that with Carson and I, like, but we think what happened is 21 Pilots plays with the mainstream. They played with the mainstream when it came to Blurryface, the announcement of Trench. So we think they played with the mainstream, and mainstream talking about Dima and talking about DMA.org, that allowed the bishops to know what was going on. And that's the reason why they found out what Clancy was doing and how they found out what Clancy was doing. And that kind of starts to become more true as you look into the narrative, because the bishops in DMA.org has heavy media influence this coming album. So that's kind of like what some theorists are thinking about.
That explains the new Chipotle deal. Okay, I'm starting to see the connections here.
Yeah, and definitely not the propaganda. It's the Chipotle stuff. But by the way, the Chipotle burrito is really good, and you should try it if you haven't. It's really good.
I might make a video out of it. That would, clickbaiting.
Yeah.
I ate the Tyler Joseph burrito.
You should. You should. It's really good. So then we get to Dima propaganda.
Here we go.
And where it came from and why it's here. So as we move forward, on April 5th, 2021, the website was terminated, and we were left with a message stating that DMA.org was in violation of infraction number 312.1, 14.325, 919, 4514. And the numbers spell out, when you take it from the alphabet, Clancy is dead. So now we're going to start seeing the glorification of Clancy taking his own life. Which, again, if we go back to what violin is, that's the thing that we're defeating. So we're starting to see a direct example of the thing that we're supposed to take down. Blurryface then tweeted saying that the album name is Scaled and Icy, and the album name is an anagram that also spells out Clancy is dead when you rearrange the letters. Tyler says when anybody asks it in interviews that it was a coincidence and that it means scaled back and isolated, which is representative of him making music in quarantine. So, again, this kind of goes back to the ongoing joke that Tyler refuses to talk about anything regarding the narrative with someone who is not a fan. The only time that we really ever got any sort of information on DMA.org in total was when he did an interview in Discord with all of his fans.
The only time he would talk about like related things outside of that one Discord interview was when and like they had press conferences for their shows for their trench tours and everything, and so Bandito tours, and so sometimes fans would ask and he would answer, but then sometimes fans would ask and he would just be like go around the question and stuff. And then there was one interview in particular that wasn't a press conference, actually from the show that I attended, or my like radio station host, who asked who Clancy was and asked about Nicholas Rabaki, and Tyler refused to answer. Like he was like dead set on just not answering the question. And it just goes back to the thing about, you know, like nobody can know for the sake of other people's survival about like Clancy and stuff, because like if the 21 Pilots, like their fans know how to handle these kinds of like topics and like know that, you know, everything going on, you know, relates back to really serious issues and really, you know, serious like dark topics. You know, if you let like, you know, media and stuff in, they might not get everything, they might not understand everything, and they might, you know, play around with it, and they could say something like super out of pocket.
It's really funny because I represented almost like that for the entirety of me, like being an outsider to 21 Pilots. Is like I was just like, man, what the hell is this crap? This is Dima bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, but like, look, and you've grown as a person. You have lots of character development. Your 21 Pilots enemies to lover story.
It's also a coincidence. Hey, I'm doing all the 21 Pilots re-reactions when I'm at the age of 21. Okay, Brad Pitch, the music lore,
you really
coming soon.
Yeah. So, it's also if Tyler gave you any sort of information regarding the lore, it was, well, what do you think that means? And it was a test to really understand and see if that person knew what they were talking about. The first interview back from Trench Era, somebody said, so who is Clancy? And Tyler asked him, how do you know about Clancy? And they responded, well, we've listened to the record. And Tyler said, Clancy's not on the record, and then refused to answer the question.
I see.
So,
and this interview wasn't with a fan, it was with a radio station host.
Yeah. So that's kind of another pattern that Tyler likes to follow, is making sure that the people he's talking with know what they're talking about.
And also, Tyler really encourages people to make these stories and these narratives their own. Like, there's general, like, you know, like, there's, like, a general plot going on, and if you understand that, that's cool. But, like, the little bits and details, like, who the bishops are and, like, all that kind of stuff, like, that's kind of up to the fans, in a sense, because he doesn't want to tell us. He wants this music to be ours, and that's something I do appreciate. And then there was this one interview before Trench came out he did with Zane Lowe of BBC Radio 1, and he talked about how in the beginning of Blurryface era, Blurryface was just kind of like this boring weird, like, bad guy character. But then as the era went on, people, you know, like me, for example, like, started, like, saying, like, oh, like, Blurry's personality is, like, this, and, like, he acts like this, and he does this, and he probably likes this, and he doesn't like this. And, you know, we kind of, like, built up this character for him, and we gave him, like, flesh, and we gave him, like, a soul, when he was just, like, a mere, like, skeleton. And so, you know, Tyler said, as people started talking more about Blurryface and, like, making him into, you know, this, like, huge character, I realized everything that they were saying was true, and that, you know, that's just kind of became who he was. Like, it became, like, canon, if you want to use, like, fan terms. And so I feel like he did a lot, like, of that same thing with, like, Dima and stuff. And it, you know, goes back to, like, Blurryface, like, liked Shy's tweet. She said, this is what happened, and Blurryface said, yep, that is what happened. So he doesn't want the media to play around the story. He only really wants, like, the fans to play around the story, because we know what we're dealing with, I feel like, a little bit more than other people.
Oh, I feel like I've been past, like, this top secret folder right now. It's like, surely I was not expecting this to be such an interesting and, like, interactive, engaging experience, but
it is really a very interactive and engaging experience.
Very interactive. So moving on, we have the Psy symbol. It has been rumored that the Psy is supposed to represent a different perspective. The Psy is also pronounced the same way that the abbreviation of scaled and icy is pronounced, Psy and Psy. So, again, this kind of goes back to how consistent the boys are in what they do. So, not only does scaled and icy represent scaled back and isolated, it spells out Clancy is dead, and the abbreviation for it is Psy, and the Psy has also been a huge part in this whole narrative and where we're going next with scaled and icy. So, again, it's just very, very careful thinking. And that makes me love the narrative more, and then hopefully it allows you to really start appreciating the music and what it's.
Yeah, it's so, like, intricate. I've always just kind of been like, whatever, but no, yeah, that's scaled and icy. I really like the fact that he just denied, you know, that it meant anything, and it's very obvious that it does. Like, this, you know, the whole story just works around it. It's very clear, and like you said, everything's very elaborate, so
yeah,
it's fun to follow along with.
So, it has also been theorized that the bishops are using the Psy to hijack the meaning of East is Up. The bishops are more aware of the meaning that East is Up has due to the fact that they discovered Clancy's letters. So, the East is Up symbol is a pitchfork, like an E pitchfork, and the
East
Psy...
is Up!
Yeah, and the East is Up is the way that you take to get out of Dima. You have to go east.
They become self-aware!
Yeah! Exactly. That's literally what this album is. They've become self-aware. And when you think about the East is Up symbol, if you listen to Nico and the Niners backwards, you hear we denounce vialism, which is what the bishops are teaching, and we will leave Dima and head true east. And we are banditos. So those tiny little clues and stuff are hidden without the within the album, and that makes it, like, really cool to listen to, knowing that it's there. So if they hijack that meaning, they're kind of making it seem like that's not the way out of Dima. You thought it was, but now we're using this thing that you saw as hope to fuel our propaganda.
And I would just like to, when we get to the next slide, when there's, like, pictures of, like, the aesthetic and stuff, I would just like to talk about that a lot, because I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's so much that goes into this. So, the Psy continued. The Psy has been used by the band a lot as far as the narrative goes, aside from them using it as their profile pictures, and they put it over their eyes, which is why we think it represents a different perspective. It's shown up in merchandise, billboards, and even their own album. So.
And then also, it's very worth it to note that, so, you know, the band symbol, like the traditional 21 Pilots logo, it means a lot to people because it, you know, means hope. And 21 Pilots music is basically like, you know, hey, we're going to get through this. You're going to get through this. Like, there's hope in your life and there's hope for you. Like, that's what Tyler hopes to portray in his songs. And so, like, overall, like, as like a thematic message. And so, you know, the symbol, like the 21 Pilots logo, is just like, this like big thing. It's like this just sign of hope and this sign of getting better. And fans back in 2016 used to write "Stay Alive" and write the little logo next to you. If you were like having a rough time, they would write a little message and then add the logo at the end, just a little reminder. I mean, people have this logo tattooed on them. They have it everywhere.
Got the shit on my wrist, I got the shit tattooed
exactly.
on my wrist.
And so,
yeah, Tina, you're gonna have to get that removed.
No, but it's really interesting to see how that's not the quote-unquote logo anymore. If you look at their profile picture, it's this side logo that the bishops have created, because the bishops understand that this logo of theirs is, this sign of hope, and they're like, we don't want people to have that. That's stupid.
Is this the first time that this symbol is... Are all these pictures, like... Was this all at the same time, or was this logo seen before this new album?
This is just completely, like, specific to this era.
It was Tyler's... It was Tyler's profile picture first, right? Like, that was, like...
that was the first hint.
Was, like,
this picture that you see of Tyler. And then after that, we saw the album cover, and then the billboard, and then Josh changed his profile picture. I'm going to go in chronological order. And then another thing, the bishops... So Clancy described Dima as, like, this dark, gloomy, concrete jungle kind of place. Just not a very visually appealing place to be. If you watch the music videos, it looks boring. It looks kind of like a prison almost, and it's just dull and gloomy and sad. And so this aesthetic, they're making Clancy's Dead into this like bright, happy thing, like Scaled and Icy, like this like pink and blue and happy, bright, very inviting aesthetic for the mainstream media to see. So when the mainstream media is like, oh my god, I love Scaled and Icy, they're saying, oh my god, I love the anagram for Clancy is Dead, or oh my god, I love Clancy is Dead, like that whole thing. It's this kind of like twisted kind of metaphorical message. And so that in turn is glorification of Clancy's death, or of suicide, which is vialism is. So they're getting mainstream media to kind of quote unquote practice vialism. And then also another thing is 21 Pilots like aesthetics previously in their albums, aside from maybe like Regional Vest and Vessel, they started to have like set aesthetics like from Blurry Face on. They weren't really like super inviting. I mean, red and black are my favorite colors for reasons outside of Blurry Face as well, by the way. And so like, it's these like dark, edgy colors, and you're like, oh, like, that's
so it explains
kind of
the Spider-Man profile picture.
Yeah, thank you. I love that Spidey suit. It's my favorite. And so, like the red and black for Blurry Face was like edgy, and like, the 21 Pilots fan base was like a cult. Yeah, it's like edgy, like untouchable kind of fan base. And then in Trench we had this very like deterring aesthetic of like this bright yellow and camo, which eventually actually became a fashion trend in 2018. But like at first, like it's just not a very like inviting aesthetic. You see bright yellow and camo and you're like, that's not a very pretty combination. And so like with this aesthetic, it's very appealing to the masses. These like nice like retro aesthetic, which has been in for a long time. So like they're kind of like pulling you in to like the propaganda. Nice. And then another thing, go ahead.
Oh, nice colors, like the pretty bright colors, and
very warm, happy, kind colors. Nice, like they're going against everything Clancy said about Dima and trying to say like, hey, that's not what Dima is. This is Dima. This is this bright, happy retro Dima, or Dima or. They're not going by Dima right now. They're going by Dima.org, like as in like a company. So like with this narrative, we've gone from being in the Dima universe to putting Dima in the real world and making them like this corporation that's over 21 Pilots right now. If that helps explain that. But it's also interesting to see like how, you know, like the tweet with Blurryface saying, blue was the sign of defeat. We all thought that blue meant Blurryface defeat back in the day, or most of us did. And so seeing blue mean Tyler and Josh are under control of Blurryface is kind of like this like jarring, like, what? Like we thought that was a safe color. Like we thought blue was the good color. When we originally saw Tyler change his profile picture, we were like, oh my god, it's blue. Like Blurryface feet is going to be like a really big thing here. And then we got there and we're like, oh my god, like this is like Dima's 21 Pilots, but in the world, like that's crazy. I thought blue was a good thing. And so we're kind of seeing Blurryface manipulate us and saying like, hey, like look, these are like good things. Like you think these are good things, so therefore they must be good. And like, you know, back to the whole like East is Up thing, like, hey, this is our logo. It looks kind of like East is Up, right? It's a good thing. Like they're trying to manipulate us, basically. And I mean that's all like theoretical. You know, maybe it's just a coincidence, but
there's no coincidence.
But
it does make a lot of sense.
It's very, and also, you know, like the yellow, that's the, you know, the official Bandito color, like the rebel group for Dima. So, you know, like in the album cover, you see yellow and you're, oh, the Banditos, like this must be safe, this must be good, like that kind of thing.
I also think it's important to note that the bishops cannot see pure yellow, but the bishops are using yellow on the album. And the fire that's coming out of the dragon's nose. I think that that's probably going to have significance later on in the storyline as well. And
yes,
also having it be so inviting, and the idea of propaganda, and also something that is really cool that I like to talk about is when the posters came out. Let's go back to those real quick. The fine print down here at the bottom states that anything shown, any ideas or anything shown in the live stream does not reflect upon the band's true beliefs. So honestly, I think we're going to start seeing more of that glorification take place as this album expands and grows. And it's probably going to get more and more intense. That way we have a direct feeling and a direct example of why this thing is bad and why you should hate this thing and why it needs to go.
Not even kidding. I went from, dude, I like don't even care about this album coming out to, oh my god, what the hell is going to happen next? So
yeah,
that was your goal for this. It's definitely working.
Way to go, you guys.
That was
we tried our best.
Yeah, I'm all caught up. I'm like, okay, I'm really curious now to see what happens on May 21st.
Yeah, the name of our slide while making it was the ultimate goal to get Brad to like 21 Pilots. It's really cool to like get you interested and really see other people love the narrative as much as we do. So,
and another thing too that I just want to add, you know, like a lot of people when they look back at their own music, they're like, oh, this is badly produced, you know, it's just kind of there. It sounds, a lot of people say that Regional Best sounds like it was put into a toaster or a microwave. But you know, like after understanding all this stuff like about the lore, it is fun to go back and look at the old songs, no matter how you think they sound, and try and find lyrics at least that are like, oh, that's probably where Tyler got that from, or oh, that reminds me of Blurryface, or oh, that reminds me of like Dima as like a place. Like it's really fun to go back and look at that, and I hope it kind of helps people in general, especially you, appreciate it more, because it is nice to have, you know, like another face to the music. Like it's nice to have this other side where you can like genuinely find like some sort of appreciation for it, and so it just makes like the listening experience a little bit more enjoyable. And even if you don't like, you know, how it sounds, you can still be like, you know what, I respect the effort, and I respect the the craftsmanship that went into this to be able to use it for further projects.
Yep, that's exactly how I feel. I feel like even though I still probably have like problems and issues with like the technical aspects of it just not really sounding all that great to me, hearing this and being able to like attach certain lyrics to the lore and like it everything stringing together, like the further in it goes, the more interesting it gets.
Yes.
And like the deeper and I love the fact that as it keeps going, like it's showing that there are things in past albums that were like undiscovered still, right? As like new information comes out, like yeah, it just gets me excited, and I'm actually really kind of psyched to see how this whole thing turns out.
That's awesome. That's the goal.
I'm so happy. That's exactly what we wanted.
Yeah, that's the best accomplishment. So.
Yeah, I would consider this to be a very big success, as I literally went into this like, okay, you know, let's see what this is, you know, whatever, to, oh shit, so that's what everybody's been excited about. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The fact that like Tyler does kind of like gatekeep it, you know, like he does, it's very interesting. Like the really deep stuff it really is kind of like underground, and like Shy and Kars, like you guys are like obviously like a huge part of this, you know, you guys have dug super deep, and it's just really cool to hear it from you guys, because you guys have been so involved in the theorist.
Yeah, I feel like I'm getting it straight from the source. Like
I
honestly could not
feel like a source of like yeah, absolutely.
Well, no, it's an honor. It really
I'm
is
very
an honor.
honored to
I'm honored
be
as
considered
well.
that
The honor
important.
goes both ways.
Yes. So and I mean like Carson and we love different parts of the narrative, and both like the parts that I'm not fond of Kars loves, and the parts that Kars isn't fond of I love. So us working together
I'm really
been,
curious,
like,
what parts are you not fond of, both you guys? What parts do you guys
you want
not?
to go first?
Okay, so the Blurry Face album, I love the concept. I just wish that they would have made it even more conceptual, rather than it just being so individualistic. Which is why I ended up falling in love with Trench so much, was because it was full of so many things that I could just sit and dig through. And just as well as it's not the album itself, like listening to the lyrics and stuff, it can be very like interchangeable to what it means, and Trench is kind of straightforward in terms of that. So I really love like you can listen to Levitate and you can really just understand what narrative is being told in one song, and I really admire how cryptic Trench is, and I'm not mainly like into analyzing just one character. I feel like I'd kind of get bored really fast.
See, and then it's like the complete opposite for me, because like, well, Blurry Face is extremely personal to my life, and that whole like character and concept is just on another level. Like it's really hard to explain what it's done for me. But I love the individual feeling that comes with like that album and that character, and I love like diving into like, you know, who that character was, like specifically to Tyler, because it made me feel a lot alone with like, you know, my issues, insecurity and stuff. Insecurity as like a concept has been like a huge part of my personal life. So like having that specific concept be explored in such like an individual way, and like in such like a loud way, really enticed me and really excited me. And I just love being able, because like Blurry Face as a character, there's so many different parts you can go with it, because like the general structure of him, like he is entirely flawed. He cannot be good. If he has any quote unquote good traits, they're twisted to make it bad. You know, like he's entirely like insecure and flawed and stuff. And so like taking that structure and applying it to like, what does he think? What does he act like? What does he say? Like all this kind of like, how does he view other people? Like him as a person and as like a character that can like interact with other people is just super interesting to me. I love like breaking down that stuff. And like I love the album and stuff, and how you can apply like the blurry face perspective, like of if blurry face was the one like singing the song, like what would that mean, and stuff like that. It's just really interesting to me. And then I feel like Trench and like Dima and like that universe has a lot of plot holes, and Shy has definitely helped me fill some of those plot holes. But I feel like it's just it's too broad for me to get like super into it the way that Shy has. But like I completely respect Shy for like wanting to like get into it that much, because like I wish I could.
No, it's like
Nice.
I could never ask for a better sidekick, I swear, because you put Carson and I in a room for 15 minutes and one clue, and we have 17 different ways that could come out to be, just because
Wow.
we specialize.
Exactly.
We just specialize in 2 different things, but it all comes
It's
together.
very
to be one thing.
complementary.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
you guys like
And-
work well together.
And I love the way that like this era, like specifically like this lore, they brought, not only did they bring Dima back and like the ideas of Dima, but they brought Blurryface back, because Blurryface, as I knew him, like the Twitter guy and everything, was completely absent from Trench. And that's also why I didn't like I don't like Trench as much as I love Blurryface, because they got rid of the Blurryface that I was used to and they replaced him with something different. And I was like, that's a little crazy. And I mean, I've come to completely respect that. And I love Trench and Dima and everything that's about. And I really like the idea of the bishops. I think it's super sick, but it's not the same as the Blurryface I was used to, you know, researching and studying for the whole of that album cycle. So them bringing back the Twitter account and everything, like, and like, you know, Blurryface as like a character in this era and not specifically like the bishops all the time, is just really cool. And I feel like, you know, me and Shy can like work together on that a lot, and it's just really nice.
Something that we've said is like we go into this era hand in hand, because in the areas that I'm unfamiliar with, Karst definitely has me beat in Blurryface, and I like to think that I have Karst beat in Trench. So
You do.
so it's like on air, like in certain things that reference Blurryface, Karst is on it, and certain things that reference Trench, I'm on it, and together, Karst and I just make jokes that we make a good team. So
We do. We're like
think
we're
we
like
do.
the Tyler and Josh of the clicky theorists.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I just a lot of respect to Karst, and
A lot of respect to Shy. And Shy's the one that got the Blurryface like and everything, so that just
Oh,
makes me respect her more.
stop. Because I called Karst after I got it, and I was like, "This is our notice, best friend. Like, this is not even, this is not just mine." Because I know in a lot of ways that I wouldn't be able to understand Trench the way that I do had Karst not guided me with Blurryface. So it's just, again, we just help each other out, and I literally could not ask for a better person to go into this era with. So
Oh, I'm gonna cry.
That's
I
so
feel honored to
sweet.
be sandwiched in between you guys. You know, I almost want to, because on my screen, I'm right in between. I almost want to move myself. So
yeah, it's just, you know, this album also, the narrative, it brings a lot of people together, because you start to realize that you're all kind of going through the same stuff, and
Oh yeah.
and being able to put yourself in the position of this narrative and what it means, and seeing other people do the same, it's a very uniting experience. And I think that's why so many people really do fall in love with this band and the narrative and really delve into it, because it means something.
Absolutely.
It is
And
not
there's nothing like being at a show with like, you know, thousands of people who
Oh my
feel
gosh,
the
yes.
same way that you do, and you know, it's like there's literally no feeling that compares to being in that pit. Like, there's a reason why I saw them like 10 times in 2019. Like, I don't
Oh, yeah.
like, it's
Yeah.
addictive. The like
It is.
being there with people who like just get it. Like, it's an addictive feeling, because it's
It is just like you feel like
so
you're
special.
like home in a sense, and you have like a
Yeah.
very like familial like respect and perspective on like the whole fan base. And like, not to get too personal, but I'm physically handicapped, so I'm in a wheelchair most of the time. And so like, you know, a lot of times like I feel like I'm generally like kind of looked down upon with society and like all that deep shit. But like, you know, in the 21 Pilots fan base, when I show up to a 21 Pilots show, they're like, "Oh, you're a 21 Pilots fan. That's sick. What's your name?"
not only
You wanna
that,
slice a
and I
pizza?
bet you reveal yourself, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. It's just
it's like,
It's yeah, it's crazy, but it's so great, and it's just so it's just a really uniting thing, and it makes the music more special too because like we said, this music Tyler wrote it so that the metaphors are so metaphorical and so out there, so that people can like take these crazy things and make them what they want, and so like this music can fit to whatever narrative you want to tell. This music can fit to whatever message you want it to be.
I really
Like,
love that.
At all.
As
And
someone who
so-
also like, I mean, my entire life I've been dealing with insecurities and stuff as well, and it feels like something that you can fight off momentarily, and it just keeps coming back in different forms. And as I just get older, and like as I just keep changing, the problems just keep changing as well.
Oh yeah.
And I really understand the narrative, and a lot of things actually click with me, and I'm like, okay, I kind of see where each little piece is going, and I see the deeper meaning behind it, and I really actually feel honored to have been like presented with this information in the way that I have. And thank you, Tina, for setting this up so much.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah,
Tina.
thank
This
you,
is
Tina.
so great.
This was so cool. I hope that like if you walk away with anything, Brad, I hope you walk away with knowing that this music it's not just empty promises and words. Like there's a lot of meaning that goes behind it, and finding meaning within it too is very fun. And
Well, I hope you know that you made a believer. You made someone who was skeptical actually believe this shit. And I'm not. Yeah. So you did it.
Our
This
win.
is just me saying. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I get it. I get it,
Yeah.
and I believe it, and I see it, and I'm like, okay, I'm down. You might have actually created someone who maybe not is a big fan of like everything they've made, but moving forward, you kind of created a fan.
You get
Little bit.
excited. Yeah.
I am
let's
excited
go.
to see what's happening. Yeah.
let's go.
Brad, I hope when you listen to Blurry Face for the third time that you like the
I'm not
songs
kidding.
just
I
a
was
tiny
thinking.
bit
I was
more.
like, it's like I released this video. I was thinking reaction to Blurry Face.
Like
I will watch it in a heartbeat. And if there's any like if either of y'all, Tina or Brad, have any questions about like the lore or like Dima or Blurry Face, you guys can like reach out to us whenever you want.
yeah, whenever
Um,
you need.
And if
We
you
will-
guys need a bunch of misinformation,
500%.
I'm here for you guys. Yeah.
Like
If I need another perspective, if I need someone to, because I think like Blurry Face to me was the peak of alternative music for middle schoolers in 2016. If I need somebody to humble me, I just come.
I mean, maybe it would be even cool if like one day, like if people had questions that like we didn't cover or something, that we could do like a follow
Oh, a
up.
follow up? That
Oh,
would be
that would
awesome.
be so good.
Yeah, there'll be
That would
like
be
a
so
ton of people in the comments probably just like, just, I mean, you guys will be able to see through the video. Like, people are really passionate about this stuff in my community.
Oh,
So
yeah,
I'm
I
sure
love
that
the
there'll
comments
be
in the
plenty of
video section.
material to talk about.
Yeah. So, I agree.
Brad's
really
already
fun.
agreed to like camp for a show with me, so
Yes.
Yes!
he's just
Dude,
in
that
it
would be
now.
crazy. If I showed up to a show, I wonder how many people would like, be like, hey, it's you! Oh, everyone go get him!
Everyone get him.
Tina, which Bandito shows did you see?
I saw Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I saw Memphis, Indianapolis, Columbus times 2, and then oh my god, Colorado. Oh, okay, Denver. Oh my god, what was in the second part of the? This is how bad it is. Like Denver. Crap. Oh my god. No, Minneapolis, Des Moines, Denver, and Las Vegas.
We
Those
went
are
to the same
good.
show. We went to
Oh my gosh.
the Columbus show together then.
Oh my gosh, yeah, so good.
I went to night 2.
I
Yeah.
want to go to a Columbus show. So
We
bad.
were-
It's on my bucket list.
We were in the seats for night 1. It was like a last minute decision to just like buy seats for night 1 because we didn't want to miss it, and then I was in the pit for night 2, and it was like the most emotional.
So good.
Oh man,
I
I cried
loved
so hard.
Columbus.
Yeah, it was great. Nothing beats it.
I'm excited.
Nothing
Me and Shy have plans to go to the next Columbus show together, so we can camp and have fun.
Yeah.
Yep, that's I'm not gonna miss another Columbus show. So I'll
So
see
we'll
All
you
right,
see you
guys
there.
if you guys all
We'll
do
see you
that,
there.
we should all like meet up and Dude, if
Oh my
all
gosh,
four
yeah.
of us were, oh my god, like that would be like we walked through it. There would be
Well,
like
and-
crowds following us. Like
It would be
move
so much
through,
fun.
important people coming through. We're coming to the front. Everyone move.
And Aries is already like I'm for sure going with Aries and probably
Oh,
Aries
that'll be so fun.
boyfriend.
That's gonna
So
be so much fun.
like, oh, big party,
sign me up.
big clicky party.
Yes,
Oh my gosh, clickies are the best.
they are.
I agree.
You know, we have rough spots as a fan base. I don't think I would ever want to repeat 2016.
Oh,
Again.
and that is
But-
when I like left that was when I like took a little break from being a clicky 2017,
Yeah,
2017,
good for you. See,
Yeah.
I was what,
2016.
14, didn't know any.
I was like,
that was
"Ew,
back
what is
when I was
happening?"
I was in theater. My first exposure to 21 Pilots was literally someone chose Stressed Out to like do this interpretive dance
Oh my god.
to it. Yeah, it's as bad as it sounds. Like it's like it's not that it was like awful. It's just like as a 17-year-old who's like hateful of everyone and everything. I'm just like I see this shit. Like what the
Cringe.
hell am I watching?
Right.
I'm like what the heck is this?
If it makes you feel any better, my first exposure, that was my first exposure to 21. But the first time I heard Stressed Out on the radio, I only heard the chorus, and I was like, I like the chorus, that's good. So on my birthday, I used an iTunes gift card to download Stressed Out, and I listened to the whole song, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I thought a different person was rapping, and I was like, well, because I knew there were only two people in the band. Because I was in a fandom, and they were like intersected with the. So I knew a little bit about 21 Pilots. I knew that there were two people in the band, and I was like, there's a second person rapping, and they didn't credit him. Like that's so awful. Like that's awful. And I thought that was like, you know what? They're probably like industry plants or something. And then I heard the blurry face part at the end, and I was like, this sucks. Like what is this? And I didn't listen to them for like 6 months.
That's so funny. It's like I see parallels between like how you saw the music and how I saw the music. It's like I saw that shit. I'm just like, what the hell is this? What is all this pitch shifting and I was like, get this out of my face.
I didn't mind the rapping. I just thought that they were like ingenuine people or something, which is like the absolute opposite of what this band is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it was just really
same.
funny.
It's funny because we all had like the same experience. Like the first interaction I had with 21 Pilots is like I would listen to Holding On to You, but when like Blurryface came out, I absolutely hated Fairly Local. Like was not into it, was not vibing with Blurryface or anything like that.
Single. It was the first single, right? I'm pretty sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
'Cause I remember,
it always
like-
makes me laugh thinking about how like fans of like Vessel and stuff, like fans who've been there, like Tina, who've been there like 2013 and stuff, were like, oh my god, new 21 Pilots music, and you go from like Guns for Hands and like Holding On to You and like Migraine and Ode to Sleep to Fairly Local.
I remember, like, I was working at a Walgreens at the time, and I remember, like, oh my god, new 21 Pilots song. Like, I got out of work when I was done with my shift, and I sat in my car, and I listened to Fairly Local, and I was like, what in the hell is going on? I liked it, but I was like, what? Okay, whoa.
It was so
It's
different.
very deterring.
It's really interesting
like,
you guys talking about this because I never had that perspective. But
The
yeah, I
first song-
imagine you go from like the really pop heavy sound to something as just obscure as Fairly Local. That's definitely a
But see,
curveball.
And you know the beauty behind that, because this was your first introduction to Blurryface's character. And so Blurryface is going to want something obscure. He's going to want to make Tyler insecure about what he's putting out. So he's going to make it obscure. He's going to make it unlikable. He's going to make it completely different. But then if you look, like, if you dive into the stems, I love diving into the stems. Like, there's, like, this guitar feature, and there's, like, the chorus. And they're pretty minimal, but, like, they're these, like, grand-sounding, like, loud, like... Because, like, Blurryface is the culmination of everything that 21 Pilots... Like, this big, like, conglomeration of, like, this is it. Like, this is who we've been talking about the past 5 years of this band being a thing back in 2015. So, like, you know, like, Blurryface is big, huge thing. So, of course, like, there's going to be, like, some grand sounding elements within the song. But overall, it's going to be obscure because Blurryface doesn't really want you to enjoy 21 Pilots in the way that you do. He wants you to think that Tyler and Josh are sellouts, stupid, and bad at making music, and Tyler and Josh have to deal with that and do what they want. And so it's like this fighting within the technical aspects of the music. It's really
interesting. Oh, yeah.
Makes me actually appreciate where I stand in the destruction of the 21 Pilots. I was like just like a grenade just throwing myself. Whatever.
No, you have a lot of importance. Like, I don't think you understand. You opened up like a huge discussion on the Blurryface album. Like when
I'm really curious. I am very curious because I have not heard of anything of this.
You have never heard anything about it?
Young Bradley just tearing it apart.
I'm really curious.
Dude, I remember because I was on 21 Pilots like Stan Instagram at that time, and everybody was talking about it and making posts about it, and like there were like long discussion threads in the comments of people being like, "No, he's right. Like the lyrical content of Blurryface does not expand on the narrative like it should," and then other people being like, "Yeah, but it's not supposed to," and like it opened up like a huge discussion.
Wow.
Yeah, like people were linking it like for like the reasons why they don't like Blurryface, and other people were linking it and being like, well, I disagree with him because of this. It was huge. Like, I don't know if it was as big as on Twitter, but it was on Instagram.
It was on Instagram, because I was on Instagram too at the time. I was on Instagram and a little bit of Twitter, and it was bigger on Instagram. But like I had, this is embarrassing, I had your video, like the original Blurryface video, linked in my Finsta account for like a year and a half, because one, I thought it was hilarious, but two, all of my friends,
that's so funny.
Oh my
all of my
gosh.
friends knew that I loved Blurryface. Like Blurryface is my favorite album of all time, just because of what it means to me and everything. And like technically, I know Trench is better than Blurryface, and technically, I know that Blurryface is one of their weaker albums, but it's my favorite of all time, and everyone knew that. And so like I put that video there, and I was like, guys, like, you guys are gonna agree with him because none of my friends like thought that like Blurryface was like the greatest thing of all time like I did. And it was just really funny. And like I just remember everyone in the clique being like, you know what, he makes points. And I remember because it gave me a different perspective, and I was like, you know what, he makes a lot of good points. I like this.
Yeah. It's always good to open up music discussion though, because
it is.
Because you learn to appreciate the parts that you like a lot more, because other people don't. I don't know. It was just, I remember it like being a huge discussion, and then I also like remember when you released like your Trench reaction and stuff. Like
and everyone was so happy.
I was so happy. Like I think I sent it to a group chat and was like, "We got him, guys!" Like I was so happy.
I remember because. Oh, go ahead, Shai.
I think we actually did a watch party. Like watching your reaction to Trench. It was so fun.
And like, I just remember I posted like a screenshot of like the thumbnail or something on Insta, and I was like, guys, the guy who hates Blurryface liked Trench. I think we got him.
It's funny being in like in the position now to where we're the ones getting you to like get involved with the band. So I don't know.
Yeah, I totally fell out because it was just like, man, I don't remember what it was, but at some point it was just like I'll be honest, a lot of insecurities swallowed me up whole, and I just was kind of like, all right, I'm done with this shit. I mean, between also, like, I had an ex who was really into 21 Pilots when I was, like, doing all that stuff. And honestly, a lot of that stuff impacted how I looked back at that content. And I felt, like, angry that I couldn't channel whatever it was that I had back then, like, currently. Because I felt like I lost whatever I had there. It felt like it was gone.
Yeah.
And,
also, like a lot of your fans then were like a lot of your subscriber base was 21 Pilots fans then. So then after everything, you were left with just this like large base of 21 Pilots fans.
Oh yeah, that's the thing is I started off as a music reviewing channel, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my god, this guy's talking about 21 Pilots. Everyone floods in, and I'm just like, holy crap! Like as soon as I make other stuff, they're gonna leave.
Yeah,
and that destroyed me.
Yeah,
that really destroyed me.
I watched it like, you know, it was a lot of pressure because it's like this is this is my fan base and they're not gonna like what I make next. And in that way, like, it was funny, you know, he didn't like Tyler or whatever, he didn't like the music, but this whole time, and with that specific problem of like, oh no, they're not gonna like what I make next, and that insecurity and that pressure, I was like, oh man, like, he would relate to Tyler so much, but like, he just doesn't know it. He just doesn't know it.
Dude, I get it now. It's you guys are literally witnessing an awakening. I hope you realize that there's like.
I'm so happy about that.
Yeah, I hope we explained it well, and
I know.
like,
I hope it didn't sound like jumbled or anything. Because
Oh, nothing.
a lot of
literally, I
shit.
picked like if you asked me to recite the entire thing back to you, I could. That's how good you guys did.
And the
I
only
really
you.
followed along with every piece, and I was able to ask questions, and you guys answered it so thoroughly. I really like. I felt, and anything I didn't understand, I just was like, okay, you know, I'll go back through the video and you know, figure it out later too.
The only place you said it felt like spaghetti was like the Bishop stuff, and in your defense, like, anyone, like, it is kind of a spaghetti sort of situation,
It
even
is.
for like
It
the
is,
cookies.
yeah.
So
It
like,
is.
you're not you know, you're not alone in that. It's
There
kind
are
of
so many 21 Pilots fans who've just given up on like all the stuff just because it's so confusing. Unless you dedicate yourself like 500%, there's just some
Yeah.
things that aren't going to connect unless you like dig really, really deep, or unless you digged really, really deep prior to going into this. And it's like, it's partly Tyler's fault for just not like saying like, this is right, this is wrong, because the thing is he wants us to like make it our own thing, and so he's not really going to want either because of that. And so like, some people are just like, I don't have time for this, like, y'all have fun, bye.
Yeah, and something else that like, because Tyler wants us to make it our own, Carson and I have like had disagreements on where we think the narrative is going next,
Oh,
or like
yeah.
what we think stuff means. Like, it's
Plenty.
so, and like, you can, like, if you watch back the video, you can see in some places where we're close, but we don't exactly align. So like, and I mean, like, that's just what makes it special, because Cars always provides me with a different perspective than my own, and I really appreciate that. So I don't know, it's just, I hope that like, when you watch it back, we don't sound like completely jumbled. And
No,
like,
don't
didn't
worry. You
explain it
guys
well.
were so like. I'm actually
Oh,
surprised
you
you
weren't
feel
at
this
all.
way, because I thought you guys were almost completely on the same page the entire time. Like, there was only like one moment I can remember where you guys had a disagreement. It's because I asked like, what do you guys, you know? Yeah, or there was like something kind of revealed itself with you guys. But besides that, literally the entire time, I was surprised by how consistent you both were with it. It made it very easy to follow along with.
I could tell basically that you guys have talked about it a lot, and then also that you guys respect each other a lot. So
Yeah.
it never like got in the way. Like, if you do disagree on anything, it never got in the way, because it's clear that you guys like have a lot of respect for each other, and
Yeah.
have
Yeah,
already
and,
hashed
like,
out a lot of stuff.
If we did disagree on something, like, we've been friends early 20, right? And so
2017?
late 2017? It was late 2017.
Yeah.
So like, it was just this big thing where it was like, you know, we would like stay on like FaceTime calls for like ever talking about like, you know, like different like theory things, like the band and everything. That was like kind of the like why we started like talking to each other. So, you know, it was just one of those things.
Yeah, and I mean, like, there's a general basis that the narrative has to follow, like, where you'll start to see Carson and I have, like, bigger disagreements, is when we start branching out and making it our own. Like, the way I view the narrative is different from the way Cars views the narrative, and,
That's kind of the beauty of it.
yeah,
I mean,
but
that's
there's
like-
a baseline.
Right.
So,
Maybe I'll come up with something on my own as well.
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
right.
yeah, for sure.
You should. And if you do,
No,
you should let us know.
Tina says that as like a joke. I'm not actually joking with that.
Okay.
No, you
We were
should.
talking about it
Hey,
earlier.
who knows? Who knows?
We were-
I
me
should
and
talk
Shai
about it
were
right
like-
here.
Yeah, honestly.
All right. So here's how it goes. Okay.
Right.
So
Oh, no.
there's a thing called blurry face, right?
All right.
All right, and it represents it's a face that's blurry, right? So
Right.
Oh
That's
god.
pretty good.
and then there's like this trench right next to blurry face, right?
You're right. Yeah. Okay.
And then it's all like scaled and icy and shit, you know, and yeah.
Yep.
So that's my, you know, that's yeah.
Wow, good job, Brad.
Honestly, that was
amazing,
like
Brad.
so in depth, and it just gave me
Yeah, like, it opened my eyes to
Ideas,
so
like-
much. Like,
Wow, I'm gonna go
I just
rewrite all my theories.
yeah, it's just like I can't believe that I missed that. You know, like really diving into this narrative, it just went right over my head. So I just, man.
I wish we could talk here forever, and honestly, we should. Like, I would totally be cool with after this video, like just chilling and talking
Yeah, if you just
regularly
want to
another
chill and
time.
discuss, I mean, like I said, there's 50 billion different things we could talk about and go on for hours about, each of us.
Yeah.
Just specific things.
Idea. What if after Scaled and Icy drops, we
Oh,
discuss what we discuss.
And the
Oh
live
Oh
god.
stream.
yeah.
Tina, you
All
have
right.
a live stream ticket, right?
Oh yeah, I got a live stream.
And you're making Brad watch the live stream.
Oh yeah,
right?
I'll definitely watch it.
Alrighty. So after
Okay, yeah.
that, we have to reconvene and we have to be like, all right, what do y'all think?
I mean,
Yeah,
you guys
for
are
sure.
definitely gonna know what I think because it's gonna be online in public or whatever.
Oh yeah.
But I mean,
Okay.
discussing the lore aspects of it.
But yeah, what I want to do is after. I mean, look, knowing the lore, it's definitely going to be part of you know what I mean. It's not like I could just forget all that shit before the album. You know,
Oh yeah.
that's gonna definitely be on my mind as I'm listening. So
I think
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of callbacks too, so you'll have to try and retain some information.
Yeah.
Do you think that what do you think it means with the fact that I mean, I guess the two singles we've gotten aren't Choker has callbacks to old stuff, but there's not Shy Away,
so
there's no lore in that,
Shy
right?
Away, well, there's the whole thing about breaking the cycle, and that could reference back to Tyler breaking the cycle of Dima and breaking the Blurryface cycle to get Skilled and Icy, where he's under Blurryface instead of trying to fight it all the time. So that's one of those things. And then the whole boy you better not be there. I tried to read it through a narrative perspective, and I got from that line what if Tyler being Blurryface, you better not be there when I get back from Trench and Dima, and then he was.
See, I see it differently.
Yeah, and then Shy has this whole thing with Clancy and everything, and then with Choker, I think Choker is what could be in Blurryface perspective, because the whole suffocation thing with the neck. Blurryface is inherently a person who chokes someone else, aka a choker, but then also Blurryface is built on flaw and absolutely no positive things. So the whole sports term to choke, to fail miserably and stuff like that. Blurryface is inherently a choker. He's never gonna fully succeed at anything. So that kind of thing. But that's just my 2 cents.
I'm gonna cut the call here because this
Yeah,
this
go
is
ahead.
this is gonna be a 3-hour video. So
It's okay.
this is fucking
As it should
insane. No, there's very little I'm gonna cut out. For the most part, it's just. I mean, let's be real here. It's the difference between someone clicking on a 2-hour and a 3-hour video is you know what I mean?
Nothing.
Yeah.
It's even if I wanted to cut out anything, which I really don't. It's people are.
Quickies will eat it up. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're dying to hear me talk about 21 Pilots.
They're dying to hear you compliment 21 Pilots, so they're gonna go crazy.
Plus, it'll kind of feel like a podcast, and some people can
It
just listen
will.
to it.
That'll
while,
be
like,
fun.
doing their own
All right, so
Absolutely.
I'm gonna actually just do the outro, and then I'm gonna end the video, and then we can just talk a little bit longer after. So,
Alrighty.
Okay.
I do apologize. You're gonna hear some, and that's all, you guys. Wow, that was an incredible experience. I mean, thank you guys for being here. I don't remember anything you guys told me, but hey, I got my paycheck. Okay, so it was good. It was good knowing you guys. All right. Well, anyways, you guys. All right, I'm out. Peace.
Follow him on Twitch.
Oh,
Here.
Tyler. Oh, hey guys.
Hey guys, how you
Welcome.
doing? My name is Richard Pogge, Professor of Astronomy at The Ohio State University, and it is my welcome you to the Autumn Quarter 2007 edition of Astronomy. Introduction to the Solar System, a course being taught at The Ohio State University main campus in Columbus, Ohio. Over the next 10 weeks, we will undertake an exploration of the development of our understanding of the solar system, from the earliest naked eye observations recorded in human history to the most recent exciting results from spacecraft and from telescopes, not only on our solar system, but on the exciting new discoveries of solar systems around other stars. Astronomy 161 is part of a two-quarter sequence with Astronomy 162 that is designed for non-science majors seeking to fulfill their general education curriculum requirement in the natural sciences at Ohio State. The lectures are pitched at a descriptive level with a judicious use of quantitative examples. We're not going to completely eliminate the math because, after all, science, like astronomy, is a very quantitative field and numbers are very informative. But it's not about the math and the derivation like a major's course would be. The real main emphasis here is on the ideas, the science behind what we've learned, and especially we're going to be taking a semi-historical approach in many cases because it's important to not only know what we know, but how we've come to know that, and the process that we know that, of course, that is science. And a lot of this course is to teach what science is all about and use astronomy as a way of illustrating that. The lectures are designed to be listened to as a sequence as part of the entire class. And indeed, these are actually just lecture recordings. There's no production, there's no special presentation involved in these. I simply strap on the microphone, turn it on at the beginning of my lecture to my class in 1000 McPherson Lab, and turn it off at the end. So you're going to hear everything live and unrehearsed and unscripted just as it happens. All the questions, everything that goes on in the class. Occasionally you'll hear things be interrupted as I do demonstrations, or I'm going to be using these classroom response card clickers in class for be able to ask students and record responses, kind of take electronic attendance, and that will all become part of the audio record of the class. The lectures are designed to stand on their own individually. They are part of a sequence, but you can listen to them individually with a great deal of benefit if a particular topic interests you. But really they're designed to be listened to all together as a sequence. And there, really, the lectures now begin to stand not only as alone as individual topics, but they begin to work together. You see how they connect all the different ideas together, and the main themes are developed through the course of the quarter. Now, astronomy is a very visual field, and the class is full of a lot of graphics. There are occasional demonstrations, and one of the limitations of the audio format is I can't share a lot of these graphics or demonstrations with you. We've experimented a little bit with some of the vodcasting and extended podcasting technologies. They're not exactly ready for us yet here at Ohio State, at least not for the equipment that I have available to me, but maybe perhaps in the future. If you are interested in getting a bit more detail on this, of course, the lecture notes are available on the web. I have some of the graphics I show in class. Some of the others I can't show because there are copyright restrictions that don't let me broadcast these to the World Wide Web. But in cases where the graphics are really essential, I've made my own versions and put them up on the web. So I don't have any copyright problems because I own the copyright and I can do whatever I want. The primary audience for these recordings are the students who are enrolled in my class during Autumn Quarter 2007. They're primarily meant as an audio record of the lectures, and the students have used them both as a way to make up lectures that they've missed, but also as study guides. They can go back and listen to lectures that they heard earlier in the quarter when preparing to study for the exams or the final exam in the course. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from the students in my class for these recordings. They found them extremely useful. It's nice to know that instead of just simply having to rely on their own memory or the notes they may take in class, they actually have the ability to go back and re-listen to an area and see what I really said, and sometimes that's really helped them out a lot. That, more than almost as much as anything else, is why I'm going to continue doing these recordings. It really does help as a way of reaching to the students in this way, and of course they're much more savvy about electronics than even old folks like me, so they're really into it. Another aspect of these lectures that's been very surprising and gratifying is what I'll call the outreach aspect. I didn't originally intend to put these up on iTunes and make them available in general, but it just sort of happened that way. And the response has been just overwhelming. I've received literally email every week from people all around the world who've come across the lectures for 161 and earlier class lectures I've done for 162. And they've said how much they've enjoyed listening to them, how much they've gotten out of them. Just a whole bunch of different types of listeners. I have a lot of them are lifelong learners, people who just wanted to take a college course in astronomy, never had the chance, and this is their chance to just listen in on a university level course, no holds barred, and really just get a lot out of it. A lot of people listen to them just recreationally. They're interested in the topic. It's easy, digestible chunks, as these sort of 45-minute lectures. For a lot of people, that's exactly the length of an automobile commute. And it's worked out great for a lot of them. I hear from a lot of people who listen to them while commuting to and from work. Even long-haul truckers I've heard from who've listened to these lectures while they're on the open road. And it lets them listen to something a little bit more than just music and actually learn as they're driving along. Our upper administration here at Ohio State has said they really want Ohio State to become a global university. Maybe this is a way of helping to do that. It's really surprising what the global reach is. So I'm going to continue, because the response has been so great, I'm going to continue making these lectures available year after year as I teach this course. They'll always be free and they'll always be available on the internet. You can go through iTunes or direct to my website. You're welcome to listen to them and share them with your friends. And if you want to send me an email and tell me how you've come across them and whether you liked them and how you're listening to them, please do. I can't guarantee a response. I get a lot more email than I can handle nowadays, but if you have questions, I might even try to answer them if I have time, but of course, I will be giving priority to the students who are in my class, but I want to extend a special welcome to all of you listening from the outside. The students actually really like it. They like knowing that they're in a class where there may only be 100 of them in the room, but there may be literally hundreds more listening in to us, not exactly in real time, but who are taking the course with them. I think that's just a great aspect of the internet, and I want to keep doing it. To those of you who may have listened to my past recording of Astronomy 161 from autumn 2006, you're going to find that this quarter's class is going to be a lot like that class. It's the same time format, the same number of lectures, the same basic topics. A few things will change. I'm going to make a few big changes in a couple of lectures and add new material and take out some old stuff, but by and large it's going to be the same basic syllabus. Partially because I'm a little lazy and I'm teaching this again in a very busy time. I don't have time to develop a whole new course, but also because it's really a format that works for me and I want to keep using it and developing it. There will be subtle differences, but you're certainly welcome to listen to it. And again, keep this from going on too long, and welcome to the course. We're going to be going through approximately 45 lectures for between now and the 30th of November 2007. We're going to cover a tremendous amount of material, and it looks like it'll be a lot of fun. So the lectures will begin, probably be posted by the 20th or 21st September, depending on how long it takes to get through the internet system. And welcome and enjoy the quarter. All right, let's begin then. So what is this class about? We've just talked about all the mechanics of the class. It'd be really nice to know what the class is about. It is Astronomy 161. It is an introduction to astronomy using the solar system as the basis. Now, you don't have to take notes today. Today is just an intro. Might as well start by consulting the experts. Some of the various themes that we're going to cover in this class. One of those themes, one of the big picture items of Astronomy 161 and 162, is well embodied by this wonderful quote from the greatest physicist of the 20th century, Albert Einstein. The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. One of the real surprising things that we have learned over the last probably 300 to 400 years of investigation of the space. In fact, if you really want to get to it, investigation since the beginning of human records, is that the universe is vast. It is greatly bigger than any human being, and yet it is understandable. We can describe the phenomena of the universe in terms of very straightforward, basic mathematical physical laws that may be expressed and manipulated mathematically. That is not an obvious result. That, in fact, is sometimes one of the most surprising things I can ever think of. That phenomena that are so far removed from human experience can nonetheless be understood, and can be understood basically. And one of the lessons that comes out of this class is not only what those phenomena are, but what the rules are that are behind them, and how we came to that understanding and our confidence that we have most of the correct explanation. Another way of approaching this class, I want to go not to the physicists of the 20th century, but to one of the greatest samurai of all time, Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote in his book of the Five Rings, the Gorin no Sho, It will seem difficult at first, but everything is difficult at first. Some of the material in this class will seem eminently familiar to you, and then all of a sudden you will find yourself on very unfamiliar territory. Sometimes it's going to be a little rough going because we're going to have to learn some language. We're going to have to learn a few ways of thinking about the world that may not be as familiar as you would like. It's going to be a little tough going at first, but all I ask is stick it out. Fight it a bit, talk it out, because what you'll find in the end is it will pay off. You'll actually will come to an amazingly deeper understanding of the world around you, and that is a goal in this class. To slip in another Einstein quote, one of Einstein's comments was that common sense is the collection of prejudices we've collected by the age of 18. That's a very similar statement about common sense. Sometimes the things we know just aren't right. Which, of course, means that since this is Ohio State, I am required to make a sports reference. And my final quote for today will be from Lawrence Peter Yogi Berra, the baseball great Hall of Famer and catcher for the New York Yankees, who is also known for his colorful use of the English language, who said, "What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so." Sometimes part of learning is unlearning the things that you know that are wrong. And sometimes it's surprising the things you really were sure. I thought that was right. Just turned out not to be so. Sometimes some of those things have been thought to be right and the absolute truth for 1,500 years. And learning how to unlearn them is what brought us forward from the ancient world to the modern world. So a lot of this class is about the sources of our knowledge and how do we establish what we know, and perhaps more importantly, what we do not know. We're going to be studying specifically astronomy. Astronomy is the oldest of the sciences. In fact, one might call it the very first of the sciences. It comes from two Greek words. It comes from the Greek word astronomos, astron for star, and nomos for a system of laws. Now, today we think of a system of laws as things cast in stone tablets and absolute statements of truth. That's not what science is about, truth. Science is basically about a process of learning about the world. Today, what I mean by astronomy is I really mean astrophysics. Astrophysics is how do the phenomena of space are explainable in terms of physical laws that we understand here on Earth. This includes up to and including the study of the entire universe that we call cosmology, which will be the subject of the second half of Astronomy 162. But I said that astronomy is a science. What is a science? It's really hard to define science, I'll be perfectly frank with you. But over the years, I've come up with the following definition. Science is not about what we know, but about how we've learned to confront what we do not know. Science is not a body of knowledge and beliefs. It's not a body of knowledge that I go out and memorize and that makes me a scientist. Science is a process. It's a process by which I ask questions of the world and I learn how to interpret the answers that I get back. Or I can break it down into three basic points. The first of these is that science provides us with a framework in which to ask questions and evaluate answers. It's basically a way of critical inquiry about the world around us. Science relies on verifiable data and quantitative measurements. It's not just say-so. It's not sitting around over beers BSing about what you think might be the case. You've got to come up with verifiable data, and you've got to be able to quantify what you're doing. Make a measurement that shows something, and that measurement has to be repeatable by others. This applies both to laboratory sciences, where you're mixing chemicals together in tubes, or historical sciences like astronomy, where I cannot manipulate planets and stars, but I can observe their properties, and I can describe and measure those properties. And finally, science is a practice. It's a practice of the critical examination of the validity of our interpretations drawn from our data. We're all scientists deep inside. We all practice a scientific method and approach to the world. You just may not know it yet. And so one of the things we will be looking at in this class a lot is not so much what we know, but how did we come to learn that? How do I know that's a better explanation than something else? How do I go through that sorting and sifting and that critical process? And that's an essential skill in everything, not just as an astronomer. It's something that I think people don't understand as well. And so a major theme of this class is illustrating that constantly. When I make a statement about the planets or about the stars, I'm not just making it up. I'll tell you where our knowledge came from, but as importantly, I'll tell you what the limits of that knowledge is. What don't we know? Where are the frontiers? Where are the raggedy edges? What don't we know? That's as important to science as all the things we've learned over the past 2,000 to 3,000 years. Now we can break the questions of science down, or the questions of astronomy down, into three fundamental questions. I owe this to my late PhD advisor, Donald Osterbrock, who always loved to begin his lectures like this in graduate school. It even translates into classes of this order. The first type of question we often ask in astronomy is, what is it? Describe it. How bright is the object? How far away is it? What is it made of? What does it look like? We want to start by describing the phenomena we're observing, come up with a common language to describe it that we can agree upon. Having now asked the question and hopefully answered what is it, we move on to a more difficult question. How does it work? What's the underlying physics behind that phenomenon? Why is it that bright? Why is it that color? Why is it that shape or that chemical composition instead of something else? This is actually often where a lot of the work of science occurs, is in this physics step. How does it work? How does it actually work? Once I've answered that difficult question, and I haven't even gotten to the point with a lot of tough subjects, I can pretty much answer question number one. Question number two is actually not fully posed for every single idea in astronomy. But if I succeed in answering this question to my satisfaction, or good enough, I can move on to the next question. How does it evolve? Having established the physical rules by which the phenomenon operates, how does that physics play out in time? When I say evolution in this class, I mean evolution in the broad sense of the original word, which means an unfolding. A phenomenon has an origin, and a phenomenon has an end, and it has a set of development through time from its beginning to its end. What is that development, and how is that development informed? By the physics of how it works. When a star is born, how will it end up? When a planet is formed, what will it look like 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion years down the line? What are the physical laws that determine what that path of evolution is going to look like? Now, we often think of evolution in terms of biological evolution, Darwin evolution. That's an aspect of it. But in astronomy, we're talking about physical evolution. How do physical systems unfold in time? That is the most difficult question of all. For planets, we can answer the first two. The third, kind of dicey, but we'll talk a little bit about what we know. For stars, we can actually answer a lot of these. For galaxies, we're just starting to crack on the third. And for the universe, surprisingly, we've actually answered questions in all three categories, but we can't really always agree exactly on how all those questions interact. That's what science is all about. It's trying to figure out how to answer these questions and the process by which we develop those answers. So what are we going to do in this class? Obviously, this is a broad topic, covers a lot of human history, and we got to do it in 10 weeks. We're going to divide this course into four basic parts. Descriptive astronomy, practical astronomy, if you will, the historical origins of astronomy, the physics of astronomy, what are the rules, and finally we're going to apply those to the solar system and try to answer those three questions that we posed for a well-defined physical system, our home, the solar system. Descriptive astronomy is practical astronomy. The apparent motions of the sun, moon, and stars, the courses of the seasons. Our timekeeping and calendrical systems are based on astronomy. The phases of the moon, eclipses, motions of the planets. All of these are descriptive phenomena. They answer the first question, what is it? Describe it. Then we need to ask what the origins of modern astronomy is. The effort to understand how does it work? Why do the planets and sun and moon move the way they do? This will bring us to classical astronomy, the Copernican revolution of Copernicus, Brahe, Kepler, and Galileo, up to the synthesis of Newton, which brings us to the modern day. This is going to take up about a week and a half in the middle of the class. It's actually one of the most important stories in Western civilization because it tells us how we got from then to now. It really is, this is the main path by which that occurred. Yes, there's wars and politics, but there were ideas that worked in the interstices between all of those world events that actually gave birth to the modern world, filled with all the technology we see around us, and an amazing change of understanding, which was almost static for 2,000 years. And in 300 years, we've basically gone from a world lit only by fire to a world in which we have begun to manipulate the power of the atom itself. How does that work? What are those rules? What are those rules we learned since Newton and Galileo and Kepler? That's the physics of astronomy. For this portion of the course, it comes down to two basic areas. Gravitation, the force that binds all matter to all other matter together in the universe. How does it work and how does it determine the motions of the planets, orbits, and tides? And then light and atoms. How do we link the realm of the very large to the realm of the very small. What is the electromagnetic spectrum? Light is the messenger. I cannot touch most of the phenomena in astronomy. They're too far away and too vastly distant for me as a human being to interact with directly. But I can see the light that comes from them across the distance of the universe. How do I read the message of that light? And I can tell you how far away it is, how bright it is, what it is made of, and give you some idea of how it has begun to evolve and change in time. It's a remarkable story about how we read so much information out of simply the light that comes from an object, how it interacts and produces light. And finally, a little word about the tools of the astronomer, the telescopes and the instruments we use to make those measurements. Then we're going to take all those pieces and we're going to put them together, and the last essential 40 to 50% of the course will be on the solar system. We will start at home with the Earth and the Moon and move on to comparative planetology. Rather than simply our friend the solar system, planet after planet, we're going to contrast and compare their properties. What lessons can we learn from other planets for the origin of Earth and vice versa? Finally, once we understand what the origin of the solar system is and how to read some of the remarkable history of the origins of our solar system, born more than 4.5 billion years ago, how can that begin to inform us as to begin to look for other solar systems, to search for other solar systems throughout the universe? When I first started teaching at Ohio State, we knew of one solar system. We now know more than 220 in the last 10 years. We will probably know more than that even by the end of this quarter. Our explosion of knowledge beyond our own solar system has been profound, and we'll start with that exploration tomorrow afternoon. Okay, see you all tomorrow. Today is Thursday, September 20th. Lecture 2, Astronomical Numbers, will begin in just a moment. So this is the first full formal lecture of the class. The podcast, I'll make a note of, was actually accepted by iTunes early this morning, so in fact is now officially live through that channel. I've put the first two podcast notes up. One is just a simple welcome note saying, what's this all about? The second one is basically the audio from yesterday's second half of the lecture where we went into the what is science, what is astronomy. And so today will be the first full lecture podcast recording for those of you who will be going after those. So those should all be ready and available on the website. Now we use this lecture, which is very elementary material, of course. I hope this is just a review for everybody. But in order to begin to talk about astronomy, we need to develop a common language. In science, we've developed a series of standard terminology, standard nomenclature, standard ways of measuring things, so it doesn't have to matter where we are or even, in many cases, what language we are speaking in order to communicate our ideas across. These standards are very important to us, and we're going to use these standards in this class. Now, as I begin each lecture, each of my lectures is going to begin with a slide that looks like this. If you're taking notes by hand and you want to take notes, this is what you should get down. This is the outline of the lectures, the key material that we're going to be covering in that day's lecture. Furthermore, these key ideas slides are very useful to you because if you collect them, they're at the top of every one of the web pages, and put them all together, sort of cut and paste them, you will have a study guide for every exam and the final exam. Because this is, in fact, what I do when I build exams. I say, what were the main important things I talked about in this class? I go to my key ideas slides, I make a list of those, and then I go through and I check them off as I make up the exam to give balance to material. Now I'll switch emphasis strongly from one thing to another, of course. I do have some options there. It isn't purely mechanical. I can't quite program monkeys to do this, although it feels that way sometimes. But this is the key of the slide. This is the outline. This is how we're going to do this. So today we're going to be talking about astronomical numbers, scientific notation, and our system of units that we're going to use in this class. So I'm going to hopefully reintroduce to you all the idea of scientific notation. That's the expression of numbers in powers of 10. And the standard prefixes that we're going to be using a lot. Kilo, mega, giga, tera, things like that. Then I want to introduce, or I hope reintroduce to you, the metric system of units. All science is done using metric units, and we'll look in particular at the key units that we are interested in and some astronomical variations upon those themes that are going to be important to us. We'll reintroduce those again as we go on in the class. But in particular, I want to get across the idea today of the units of mass, length, and time, what their origins are and how we're going to be using them. And in particular, at the end, I want to introduce the concept of weight versus mass, because it actually is important to us in astronomy and not so much on the Earth. On the Earth, we all pretty much feel the same gravity field, and so the distinction is moot, and in fact is heavily conflated in our language. When we go on to other planets, that's no longer true. So we've got to actually make this distinction physically. Now, one thing about astronomy is a science, science is quantitative, and we use a lot of numbers. And in astronomy, the numbers that we can run into can very quickly get very, very large. They are, to use the common expression, astronomical in scale. A good example of this might be, for example, the average distance between the Sun and the Earth. Written out in full precision, it's 149,597,870.619 kilometers. Now, again, since this is an introductory lecture where I'm sort of laying down what the groundwork is, I would never expect you to memorize what is a 12-digit number like that. Hell, I don't even have that number memorized. I was reading it off my screen and cheating here, too. The basic number I would expect you to remember. In round numbers, it's about 150 million kilometers. That's good enough for our purposes. And even 150 million is a pretty big number. But that isn't even getting started in astronomy. Let's take something like, just in the solar system, the mass of our star, the Sun. It's a number so big, there is not a Latin word in our language or any other modern language that I am aware of to express this number. This is basically 198 followed by, I have to count this now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times 3, 27 zeros when I express the mass of the Sun in kilograms. Now, I might be able to get away with that by saying, oh, well, let's see, there's 9 groups of 3, so that would be a 1,989 billion kilograms, and I don't know about you, my brain can't wrap its way around that either. So we see one of the principal problems of astronomy is the numbers get really, really big, really, really fast because we're going to be measuring them in a system of units that was developed in the everyday world. And so we're going to have to find ways of coping. And at various times what we're going to do is we're going to rescale our units. We're going to invent some special units for astronomy whose whole purpose is just to bring the numbers down to a reasonably human scale so I can wrap my head around them. Another number which gets, in that line, the approximate age of the Earth. It's around 4.6 billion years, or 4,600,000,000 years old in round numbers. Now, you'll notice a lot about these numbers. There's an awful lot of waste zeros going on here. We'll say something about that in just a second. Now, astronomy gets the rap for having gigantic numbers. But in fact, there are some big non-astronomical numbers in the world, too. For example, as of September 16th, as of a little bit early last week, the United States national public debt stands at $9,16,288,006,279.21. And for those of you who pay attention to the newspapers today, it's exactly that amount in Canadian dollars, because the dollar has now slipped to now it's on parity with the Canadian dollar. And I don't even want to think about what that is in euros, because the dollar just broke $1.40 to the euro. Ooh, ow. The number of Oreo cookies that have been baked since the very first Oreo cookie ran out of the factory sometime early in the 20th century is 490 billion cookies. That turns out to be approximately 1 Oreo cookie for every star in both the Milky Way and the Andromeda galaxies combined. So, maybe we should start calling these economical numbers or industrial numbers instead of astronomical numbers, because even in our modern age, we're starting to get into some really big numbers. And again, I don't know what $9 trillion is. I have a hard enough time wrapping my head around my salary, which has got nowhere near as many zeros than that. And certainly, we need a way to try to express these numbers in a way that we can not only get our head around, but we can manipulate easily. And that brings us to scientific notation. I'm sure you've all seen this. This is a real commonplace of public school education. It's basically, it's a way of taking these gigantic, either very, very large, or, and I haven't introduced them yet, very, very small numbers, and expressing them in a very compact notation. Basically getting rid of all the extra zeros I don't need and paying attention to those digits that actually have some significance here. Now here's an example of a number, 1.989 times 10 to the 30. This number has 2 parts. This main part, the significant figures, is something referred to as the mantissa. This is the part that actually matters. This is what we actually measure. This number, which turns out to be the mass of our sun in kilograms, is basically measured to about 4 decimal places. It's 1.989 times 10 to the 30 kilograms here. So this is the number of significant digits, and you just lop off the last zero conventionally. The second piece is the exponent, and this is where I hide all those zeros. The exponent basically is the number of powers of 10 associated with that number. So because I've chosen to measure mass in kilograms, the mass of the sun is going to be 10 to the 30 kilograms. That's a 1 followed by 30 zeros. So it's a very nice compact number. The mantissa gives us the actual measurement. The exponent with the times 10 to the part gives me the order of magnitude of the number in the unit system that I've chosen. In this case, I've chosen metric units of mass, or kilograms. So this is how we take these gigantic, very large, or very small numbers and rewrite them into the part I've measured and then some number which tells me the scaling in powers of 10. And this idea of scaling things by powers of 10 up and down is very, very useful to us because it allows us to contract a gigantic dynamic range of numbers into actually a very small number of easily tractable numbers. Basically, the mantissa always runs between 0 and almost 10. We can all do 10. We got 10 fingers for the most part, and so it's very easy to keep those kinds of things in your head. So let me give some just straightforward examples. The first of these, of course, is that mass of the sun, that 198 and 27 zeros of kilograms. I can't say that, but I can say 1.989 times 10 to the 30 kilograms. So another advantage that scientific notation gives us is it gives me a way to say the numbers in a straightforward, mathematically manipulable language. The diameter of a hydrogen atom. Let's go to the other extreme. Let's go to really tiny things. If I wanted to express that in meters, it's a whole bunch of zeros, 106 meters. But expressed in scientific notation, it's 1.06 times 10 to the minus 11 meters. So it pretty much tells you that it's going to be 11 powers of 10 smaller than 1 meter. So I've got, conveniently enough, a wooden meter stick here. A hydrogen atom is almost, in this case, 10 to the 12 is a trillion. So this is about 100 billion times smaller than this meter stick is a hydrogen atom. A kilogram, which I actually have very conveniently a old-fashioned definition of a kilogram. We'll come to this in a second. The difference between the mass of the sun and this kilogram is 1.98 times 10 to the 30 of these liters of water would be required to make up the mass of the sun. Okay, I'll be perfectly frank with you. I can't conceive of what 10 to the 30 actually is, but at least because I don't have to worry about writing that number of zeros and getting the count right by putting it in the exponent, it's now an easily mathematically manipulable number. Whereas writing out all the zeros, I'd get carpal tunnel syndrome trying to do the math. So scientific notation is extremely useful to us. It's a very, very simple and straightforward way to express numbers with an extremely large range. In astronomy, for example, whether we're talking about mass or we're talking about distance or we're talking about time, the three basic sets of units, we deal with extremely vast ranges of scales. Let's just take time for an example. The very shortest time in the universe is a time associated with general theory of relativity and gravity. It's 10 to the minus 33 seconds, 0.32 zeros and a one-th of a second. The longest time scale we deal with in astronomy, in round numbers, would be, say, the lifetime of the lowest mass stars, which is measured in trillions of years, or a few times 10 to the 17 seconds. That spans 50 orders of 10, powers of 10 in time, between the shortest interval and the longest physical interval that we are aware of in astronomy. And in fact, there's some people who are talking about intervals of years in astronomy that could, in certain scenarios, range up to 10 to the 100 power of years. So it's a huge range, but I can express it in numbers where at least the exponent never gets bigger than 100. I kind of know what 100 is. 100 is about the number of people in this room, I hope. 1 is one of those, we can actually turn these inhuman scale numbers into a semi-human scale by simply rewriting them in human terms. So scientific notation is very useful to us. And we'll see it over and over again. We're going to use it constantly. That's why I'm reviewing it. Now, of course, I've thrown out numbers, and those numbers are really kind of meaningless unless they actually have units associated with them. I'm measuring 10 to the 30 of what? Hogsheads? Or what is it I'm measuring for the mass of the sun, or the size of the Earth, or the size of the Earth's orbit? In the sciences, and astronomy is one of the sciences, we use the metric system exclusively, which means we will be expressing length in meters, or appropriate multiples of tens of meters. We will express mass in kilograms, and we will express time in seconds, or appropriate multiples thereof. And of course, there are some obvious time units which become useful. The year is definitely not a metric quantity, but it is a highly useful human unit that we are going to employ over and over again, not the least because it actually is astronomically based. All scientists use the metric system universally throughout the world, so we all agree upon the system of units. There are only 3 nations in the world that do not use the metric system as their primary legal system of units. That is the United States of America, Liberia, a small, impoverished West African nation, and Myanmar, a corrupt and brutal South Asian dictatorship. What is wrong with this picture? We don't seem to be able to get our act together when it comes to metric. People have been talking about metrification of the United States since I was a little kid. The only place I get to see metric anymore is when I travel overseas or when I get close to either the Mexican or Canadian border, where they actually have to split the limits, the speed limits and the distances and the signs, so the drivers from Mexico or Canada, respectively, know where the hell they are with respect to getting home. So, in this class, and I'm going to admit, I'm going to slip up and I'm going to use English units every now and then because, I'm an American boy and I've grown up with this. The only metric unit I've never been able to get my head around is the Celsius system of temperature. I've been trying for a decade to train myself in Celsius. I got thermometers in my house that read out degrees C. I just can't. I can't do it. I'm still trying. I use them in the lab, but if you told me, oh, it's 37 today, I'll go, okay. Just give me the unit. I don't know what that means. 37 Fahrenheit, know exactly what it means, know exactly how to dress. Anyway, now, that gives us the units, but in the language that we use, and this is the international language of this, we can also encode a lot of the basic powers of 10 in the language of the units. And of course, for this, there is an interesting mix of the Greek and the Latin that are borrowed for this to make prefixes on the basic units. So, for example, we like to order numbers by ordinals of 1,000. That's why you often see a comma between numbers of 1,000. That's sort of an English-American kind of convention. So we're going to use this in powers of 10 to the 3 as the main interval. 1,000 or 10 to the 3 of something will be a kilo. For example, a kilogram or a kilometer. 10 to the 6 will be a mega, like a megawatt or a mega-year or an old-fashioned megabyte. 10 to the 9 is a giga, like a gigabyte or a giga-year. We're going to use mega-year and giga-year a lot in this class. 10 to the 12 is a tera, like a terabyte. You can now buy 1 terabyte disk drives out there for a few $100. Absolutely amazing me. I remember when disk drives used to be a few $100 and they were the size of a washing machine. Terawatts is now sort of typical power output for a large power stations measured in terawatts. So these are all in steps of 1,000, and we use these as a nice shorthand so I don't have to be slinging numbers upon numbers around. It allows me to give me a nice shorthand for essentially restating my units in scientific notation. On the small end, we have the centa, 10 to the minus 2. That's an exception. A centa is 1/100th of a meter, like a centimeter. Its reason why it's a convention is because it's about the width of a human finger. So it actually turns out to be an amazingly convenient everyday unit. So centa is one of the few exceptions we have to the powers of 1,000 rule that goes into these indexes. After we get past centa, and there's other funny things like hecta and hecto, but those are just rarely used. Milli for 1,000th, micro for 1,000,000th, nano for 1,000,000th, and there's a bunch of others after that, but we really never encounter below nano here in the sciences. In physics and things like that, you can get into femto and atto and things like that, but in astronomy, we never get past pretty much milli, micro, and nano. After this is like 10, 12. Anyone know what 10 minus 12 is? Pico. Very good. So millimeters and milliseconds we'll often run into for very short intervals of times. Microseconds and microns. Micron is a funny one. It's a shortening of micrometer. And you're going to hear me use that instinctively. It's one of the few cases where we break the rules. There's always rules seem to always have exceptions. Micron is one of them. Nanosecond and nanometer. These are about as low as we go in astronomy. Nanosecond is about the shortest interval of time that we really deal with in a class like this. A couple of nanoseconds is the time it takes light to go from here to the back of the room, for example. So that kind of sets the scale for you. Nanosecond is basically, or a nanometer, for example. Nanometer is of order of wavelength of light. So that's why that turns out to be one that we're going to encounter a lot. For example, visible light has a wavelength of 550 nanometers. So these are the basic prefixes we're going to use over and over again. We're going to talk about kilograms and megayears and gigayears. Sometimes we'll talk about terayears or terawatts, millimeters, microns, nanoseconds, nanometers. So just kind of get used to translating in your head how to turn those into scientific notation. So what are the units of length? What are the units we're going to use? Well, the basic unit of length is really length, mass, and time are the basic units that we're going to encounter here from the metric system. There are a lot of other units that have to do with temperature. We're going to defer talking about temperature until we need it later when we talk about the physics of astronomy. And we're not going to talk about things like amps and volts and things like that that are electronic. That's for hardcore physics stuff. Let's start out with the most basic unit, a unit of length. The standard unit of length is the meter. I'm holding up a nice wooden example of a meter stick here. The traditional definition of a meter comes out of an effort from the French Enlightenment of the late 18th century and early 19th century to try to cut through a lot of the very provincial irrationality of the units that were used throughout the world. From time immemorial, the system of units that was defined for commerce, for measurement, for architecture, were all locally defined, and they were usually a monopoly either of the priestly class or of the ruling class of that country. And if you were able to somehow manipulate those units, it allowed you some power to manipulate commerce and things like that. But as commerce became more international, as science became more international, this individual local systems of units in each different country became steadily unsustainable. A scientist working in France had a difficult time quantifying their measurements to a scientist working in England or Germany or somewhere else. They used completely different units for length. Everyone pretty much agreed on time, for reasons that will become clear in this class, because time is astronomically related. But things like units of weight, units of length, were not agreed upon from point to point. Take English units. The foot. Well, there's a reason it's called the foot, because it was about the size of a human foot. Shakespeare's comment about man being the measure of all things, well, that was not just simply a nice pithy statement. It's actually a fairly profound statement about the way in which human beings have been used for centuries as the standard of measurement. After all, the old-fashioned cubit of biblical terms, measuring things by, oh yeah, give me 2 fingers of something. Oh yeah, feels about like that much weight. Oh yeah, let's pace this out in feet. You can see where the basic units are the ones we carry around with us every day. Then when we got organized, people said, okay, whose foot? Well, of course, it's the big guy, the king, or maybe the high priest. We'll use his foot. What about when he died? Well, then the next guy came along, and maybe that was Dennis the short-footed, and suddenly all your measurements for architecture just went all to hell. It was even within countries. Different cities would have different systems of measurements. A couple weeks ago, my wife and I were on vacation in Italy. We got to go to Venice and Florence. First time we'd ever been there. Venice and Florence had 2 completely different systems of measurements during the Renaissance. There were places in town where there was a metal ruler, metal line and metal imposed, stuck in the wall on the city hall. What was that doing there? What was that little architecture thing? Well, that was your local unit of length, and everyone would come up there and make their own ruler by measuring against the city hall measurement. And that was repeated in major city after city in different conventions. Weights were the same way. It was nuts. So people wanted to rationalize these. In the Enlightenment, people wanted to smash the state, and so they wanted to get away from this idea of personal units, and they wanted those units to be based physically and rationally on things that any person could measure anywhere. So underneath the system of units of metric is an idea of getting at things which are physically based. which we can agree upon a physical definition which isn't provincial. So, for example, the meter. The way they defined the meter was not in terms of the human body or the little metal ruler in the Göttingen town hall, but 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator of the Earth. So to define the meter, the scientists of the French Enlightenment had to first measure accurately the diameter of the Earth along a north-south meridian line. And then they divided it by an even power of 10. Have you ever wondered why there's 12 inches in a foot? Anyone know why it's 12 and not 10? We got 10 fingers, and the king didn't have 12 fingers. I know they kind of inbred, but they didn't usually inbred that bad. Anyone know why? Because 12 is evenly divisible by 2, 3, and 4 without resort to fractions. 12 is a big price to pay to divide by 3 without having to use fractions. Everybody hates fractions. If you think it's bad, wait till we talk about the Babylonian system of measurements here in a couple days. They used base 60 because they hated fractions so much. So not only did they introduce units whose basis was in the physical world, they introduced the conception of using powers of 10, the basis behind our ordinal number system, to be the measurement. So we lose all these funny things like, 8 ounces in a cup, 16 ounces in a pint, 16 ounces in a pound. All those funky numbers, they're all basic conventions which are going to be gotten rid of, and we're going to use even powers of 10, the millis and micros and megas and kilos. So that's the traditional measurement. Now that would be great if the Earth was in fact a perfect sphere, or even a slightly flattened sphere. The Earth in fact turns out to be a rather irregular, lumpy, bumpy place. It's got mountains and valleys and ocean basins. So we need a much more robust definition than the traditional 1/10,000,000th the distance from the North Pole to the equator. The modern definition may not sound much better, but in fact it is very good. It's 1/2997924 of a second, how far the light travels in a vacuum in that fraction of a second. This number here, 299792458, turns out to be the speed of light in meters. 1/12 of the length of King so-and-so's finger. But in fact, the speed of light is a universal constant throughout the entire universe in a vacuum. And therefore, we've now tied our unit of length to the fastest thing in the universe, the speed of light in a vacuum. So we've tied it to the very thing that ties space and time together. So this is what we mean by taking our unit system and tying it down to fundamental physical properties. So the meter is now defined in terms of a measurement of that short interval of light travel time, and it's measured using special optical techniques called interferometry. So it can be measured with laboratory equipment to, well, I gave you an awful lot of digits there. It actually really is measured to 9 decimal places of accuracy, in fact a little bit more. That's the exact definition of the speed of light. It's the only exactly defined physical constant in the universe, because we've tied our system of meters to the speed of light exactly. So it's the only exception in all of science. So let's sort of get an idea of where meters come into play. Let's give you a sense of scale. Well, let's start with this room. I have 1 meter up here. This is sort of the basis of our system of units. If I now wanted to go from one end of this room to the other, I'm not quite 10 meters across. Probably 10 meters gets me out into the hall on either side. So 1 power of a meter. 10 meters becomes of order the size of a room or the width of a sort of a large building. How about 100 meters? Now I get to play with my favorite program, Google Earth. 100 meters would be going roughly from the classroom here to almost to the other side of Smith Laboratory. Or if I turn this on its side, 100 meters is about the length of McPherson Lab. So a meter is about the size of a person. Tens of meters is about the size of a large room or a small building. 100 meters is the size of a large building, or the typical distance between buildings on the OSU campus. Hey, we got this power of 10 thing going. Let's keep walking. What's 1,000 meters from here? If I go due west of here by 1,000 meters, here's McPherson Lab. I go through the stadium, I get to the other side here of the Olentangy River, just getting into the sports fields on the other side of the river. That's 1,000 meters, but now because I just don't like carrying numbers bigger than a few hundred around in my head, we're going to introduce the first of the indexes. It's 1 kilometer away. So 1,000 meters is about the size of a college campus. 100 meters is about the size of a college building. 10 meters is about the size of a college classroom. And 1 meter is within a factor of 2 of the size of a college student. All right, let's go up to 10 kilometers. 10 kilometers gets me out just past the 270 Beltway here to the west and out into the train tracks there. This gets me roughly to the size of a city. So 10 kilometers is of order the size of a moderate-sized American city, or actually most cities I've ever been in are about 10 kilometers across. So whenever we talk about phenomena like, oh, that asteroid's about 10 kilometers across, it's about if you sat that asteroid down on the Earth, very gently, of course, it would sit down gently and cover the city of Columbus. So a kilometer is the size of a campus, 10 kilometers is the size of a city containing that campus. Let's go 100 kilometers. Let's keep moving west. Why not? Go west, young man. 100 kilometers away on a due west line. Now I'm starting to get a little bit of the curvature of the Earth, although it's not as obviously seen here in this picture. Gets me actually to the shore of the Great Miami River out between Troy and Tip City, Ohio. Anyone here from Troy or Tip City? Yeah, there's a couple. Which one? Tip City. So this would almost get you home. It's about 100 kilometers away, due west. Absolutely due west along the basically the current line of constant latitude. So 100 kilometers is the size of a couple of counties. So 10 kilometer size of a city, 100 kilometers, a couple of counties. 1,000 kilometers, I now start crossing state lines. And now you can actually begin to see some of the curvature of the Earth. If I go exactly 1,000 kilometers due west of here, I end up out in the middle of nowhere in a cornfield out in Andrews County, Missouri. Almost into Kansas, Nebraska. So 1,000 kilometers starts now becoming a scale of the size of at least a good part of a continent or a nation. 10,000 kilometers, now you really see the curvature of the Earth. If I go 10,000 kilometers, I've left the continent of North America, and along a great circle, I in fact end off a little bit off the Pacific coast of Japan. So when I get up to scales of thousands to 10,000 kilometers, I'm now talking about things that are kind of continent or big sections of a planet size. Planets are of order 10,000 kilometers in size or bigger. Continents on planets or major geographical structures are 1,000 kilometer sizes or 100 kilometer sizes. And then when you start getting down to sort of human scale things, you start getting into tens of kilometers. Craters tend to be kilometers, and so forth. So that sets our scale. You can sort of keep in your mind these powers of 10 actually encompass different scales of phenomena in astronomy. Well, of course, we want to leave the Earth. And now we start getting out to 100,000 kilometers. 100,000 kilometers is represented by the yellow bar at the top of this picture. It's now a little over a quarter of the way from the Earth to the Moon. So when we start getting out to scales of things that are 100,000 to million kilometers, 100,000 kilometers, I'm now talking about things that are the scales of planets and their moons, the orbital systems now of those bodies. Once I get past 100,000, that number is really big. It's starting to get hard to carry in my head. You know, we never use things like megameters or gigameters because they sound stupid. But we pretty much stop at 100,000 kilometers. But notice that 100,000 kilometers, that's 100,000 of anything is a big thing. We haven't even gotten to the moon yet. So if we're going to go out to the solar system, we're going to need a new unit of length, or I'm going to have to carry around a whole lot of zeros. So we're going to fall back upon not the size of the Earth, but the size of the Earth's orbit. And I'll define the astronomical unit of length, the AU. We're going to use the AU so much, I'm going to use the word astronomical unit maybe today and tomorrow, and I'll just call it the AU here on out. The astronomical unit, or AU, is the mean distance from the Earth to the Sun. The Earth is not on a perfectly circular orbit. As we'll see, it's actually on an elliptical orbit, but you can define the mean distance that it sits from the Sun, and that turns out to be one of those numbers I gave you at the beginning of class, which is about 1.496 times 10 to the 8 kilometers, or to put it in human units, it's about 150 million kilometers. So 150 million kilometers, that's over 1,000 times, that's getting up to be a few hundred times the distance of the Earth to the Moon, is the size of the Earth to the Sun. So the AU becomes our yardstick, if you will, for the solar system. When I talk about distances between planets, I'm going to express those in astronomical units. Because it turns out that if we go from the inner part of our solar system to the Sun to Mercury, it's about 0.4 astronomical units. The outermost planet is, well, major planet is Neptune, which is out around 30 astronomical units. You get out into the realm of the Kuiper Belt and Pluto at 40 astronomical units. You get out into the realm of distant comets at 100 astronomical units. So it's a nice, convenient unit because I don't even break 1,000 before I get out of the solar system. So it becomes our meter stick for astronomy in the solar system. But once I get past the solar system, then I start getting into hundreds of thousands of AUs. Oh, damn, there's my 100,000 again. Time to reset the units. We're going to use two different versions of this. We're going to introduce today the light year, because it's the most familiar. I'm not going to use light years very often, except maybe towards the end of class. If you take 162, you'll meet a companion unit called the parsec, which we'll leave for 162. The light year is the distance that's traveled by light in 1 year, the amount of time it takes the Earth to go around the Sun. If you express that in kilometers, that's 9.46 times 10 to the 12 kilometers. It's about 9.5 trillion kilometers. It's a huge number. Basically, it's about the U.S. national debt in kilometers. This is used for distances between the stars. So astronomical units will be our standard for going from planet to planet. We'll switch back to kilometers when we go from moon to planet or move around, groove around on the planets and moons themselves. But we'll switch to light years when we have to leave our solar system and go to the nearest stars. So again, to set a sense of scale, here's the inner part of our solar system, a sort of cute sketch at least. The distance from the Earth to the Sun on average is 1 astronomical unit, and it is a good stand-in for the distances between planets. It's about, in round numbers, 150 million kilometers. 10 astronomical units get you out to the diameter of Jupiter, so it kind of gets you inner solar system. 100 astronomical units get you into the outer solar system. We have Pluto and Uranus and Neptune and all the Kuiper Belt objects. Our solar system is hiding deep. Our pit of the solar system is hiding deep in the middle here. 1,000 astronomical units get you to the very outskirts of our own solar system. And then once you get past that, there's great emptiness until you span approximately 4.25 light years to get to the nearest star. So within a solar system, AUs are good. Once we leave the solar system, we have to switch to light years. So these are the basic units of length that we're going to be using here. Of course, light years. We have to get many light years before we start seeing even the brightest stars in our sky. We have to go for our entire Milky Way galaxy spans thousands of light years, tens of thousands of light years, 26,000 in round numbers to go from the center of our galaxy to where our sun orbits the center of our spiral galaxy. And it gets worse and worse, but I'll leave that for 162. So those are units of distance. Units of time. Time is easy. You already know what time it is. Well, more or less I know what time it is, and I'm still on time. The basic unit of time in the metric system is the second. The traditional definition of the metric system is in terms of an astronomical number. It's 1/86,400th of a mean solar day. Take 24 hours, multiply by 60 minutes per hour, multiply by 60 seconds per minute, and you get 86,400. Now, of course, this turns out to be a nice definition, but as we're going to learn, the Earth does not, in fact, rotate at an exactly constant rate of speed. So setting your clock by something who's changing its rotation speed, bad thing. So the modern definition is 9,192,631,770 oscillations of a cesium-133 isotope atomic clock. This is what's the basic standard of time for using now. We use what's called an atomic clock standard. We let the oscillations of a radioactive element define what the number of seconds is. Obviously, this really wacky number here is so that the definition of a second in terms of oscillations of cesium-133 atoms comes out to about the traditional 1/86,400th of the day. So we did, in fact, try to preserve the astronomical day, but now we've actually decoupled it partially by talking about it in terms of a cesium atomic clock. The most common uses of time in this class will be seconds, minutes, hours, and years. Once we get up into years, we will start adding things like mega-year and giga-year when we need to talk about millions and billions of years. I tend to be sloppy. I will actually talk about million years and mega-years interchangeably. You just have to be kind of flexible with me. Here's what a modern atomic clock looks like. Here's, in fact, 8 of them at the National Bureau of Standards, all sitting there oscillating away. One is the primary standard. The others are backups, and they take over if the other one crashes. So this is our atomic standard of time. All of your GPS time, for example, that your cell phones may or may not be picking up. Atomic clock standards. You can buy atomic clocks that receive microwave, radio wave, shortwave receivers on the wall. They all are on terms of these cesium atomic clocks. We'll say a lot more about timekeeping conventions later in the class because they are astronomically based. Units of mass. The fundamental unit of mass is the kilogram. The original definition of the kilogram was 1 liter of pure water. It's kind of got an analog in here with English units. Some of you may have heard the expression, a pint's a pound the world around. In fact, 1 pint of water does have a weight of 1 pound in the English system. That's why there's 8 ounces in a cup and 16 ounces in a pint and 16 ounces in a pound. That's why we use the same language. Of course, the metric system, they wanted something other than pound o water, so they defined it as 1 liter, which is 1,000 cubic centimeters of pure water. Well, this is actually Columbus tap water, so this is not exactly a kilogram. So we need a much more physical definition. And interestingly here, scientists have for the last couple of centuries actually punted on tying down the system of mass to a fundamental physical system. Length is tied to the speed of light. Time is tied to quantum mechanical oscillations of radioactive isotopes. The kilogram is actually now defined in terms of the international prototype of the kilogram, which is basically a platinum iridium alloy chunk kept at the International Bureau of Weights and Measures in Sèvres, France. So we actually haven't put the kilogram on a physical basis yet. There it is. That's the kilogram. And in fact, in the last years, people have learned that this kilogram is about 50 milligrams light. So therein we have a little bit of a problem. Our system of mass is actually slightly in crisis right now, because our standard is actually based on an arbitrary slug of pure platinum iridium alloy. There is a new definition of the kilogram being developed in terms of a sphere of perfect isotopic silicon-28, in which they will count the exact number of atoms in that spherical crystal and use that to define the kilogram. The Russians are building the first of these. It turns out it's been very, very hard. They've been trying to do it for 10 years, and we still don't have a physical basis, so kind of stay tuned on that. The way it works is the standard kilogram. They make a bunch of copy kilograms. The copy kilograms are then distributed to all the different national bureaus of standard, and then those are distributed to local agencies to check out, like the butcher scale at the store, to make certain that when you buy a kilo of ground beef, you're really getting an honest-to-God kilo, according to the kilogram in Sèvres, France. Now this brings us to an interesting distinction of mass versus weight. On the Earth, we don't make this distinction very often. In everyday language, we don't make it. But mass and weight are not actually the same thing. Mass is a measurement of the amount of matter in an object. Why we're trying to define the kilogram in terms of the number of atoms of silicon in a pure isotopic sphere, whereas weight is the force of gravity experienced by that massive object. Of the two, mass is the most fundamental of these. It counts the actual amount of stuff. So, for example, the amount of mass of this 1 kilo of water here in this jar in my hand will be 1 kilo of water atoms plus Nalgene container, whether this liter is on the Earth, on Mount Everest, up on the moon, or out in deep space between the galaxies, because it's the amount of stuff. But its weight will depend upon what the local gravitation field is. I take this guy to the moon, it will weigh 1/6 less, but it's still 1 liter of good Columbus tap water. So mass is fundamental, but weight is not. But because we only experience in everyday life the gravity of the Earth, we're pretty much just conflate these two. In metric, we measure mass in kilograms and weight, the unit of force, in a unit called the Newton. In English, we measure mass in slugs, and we measure weight in pounds. And so you can see the problem. English units is a measurement of weight. Metric units is a measurement of mass. So just to end out here, what is a relative table here? Let's take the weight of Elvis, the king of rock and roll, at various places in the universe. About the time of his alleged death, he weighed 255 pounds, or there was 116 kilos of him. Now, of course, some people think he's actually gone to Moon or Mars. On the Moon, the gravity's 1/6, so it'll be 42.2 pounds of Elvis, but it's still 116 kilos of him because it's the amount of stuff he is. On Mars, he'd be 97 pounds, but it's still 116 kilos. On Jupiter, it'd be 597 pounds of Elvis, but still only 116 kilos because the substance hasn't changed, just the gravity field. And of course, why not just keep going with the ridiculousness of this experiment? If we go to the Sun, Elvis would be 7,144 pounds of weight. That may be one big hunk of burning love, but it's only 116 kilos of the king of rock and roll. Okay, I'll see you all tomorrow. September 21st. Today is Lecture 3, The Starry Night. Yesterday, we did a basic introduction, just to kind of wind things up a little bit, to how we use numbers in astronomy, what the basic units we're going to use. Today, I now want to begin our exploration of astronomy with a lecture on the night sky. The approach that I'm going to be taking in this section is going to be largely an historical approach. There's a reason for that. What I want to have happen is I want to have the way in which you learn about this material through the course of this class to mirror how we, meaning human beings, learn this material over human history. We start with some of the most basic observations about the night sky, the things you can see just by walking outside and looking up. Everything we're going to talk about this week, and even for most of the subsequent week and the week past that, don't need telescopes, don't need spacecraft, computers, or any of the fancy technologies of the 20th and 21st centuries. In fact, they need nothing more sophisticated than a couple of Mark I eyeballs connected to an operating human brain. And that's really how most of us experience the sky and have experienced the sky for most of human history. So the key ideas today is, what do we see when we walk out at the sky? What do we see in the starry night? Well, one of the facts that you can learn, sort of as a bring away, almost like a little trivial pursuit question, is that there are 6,000 stars visible to the naked eye over the entire sky. So if you could travel throughout the world and see the night sky throughout the course of a year, and you were keeping track, you could probably count about 6,000 stars that you can see without having to use a telescope, a camera, or anything else. We're then going to introduce today the constellations, these figures that are drawn in the sky by connecting the dots between the stars, and introduce you at least to the major of the 88 modern constellations that we use. These are the signposts in the sky. This is how we lay out the territory of who is where, when, within the night sky. We'll even say a little bit about the uses of the constellations. Constellations are multifaceted. They've had lots of uses through human history. They've as varied as simply cultural and religious roles that they play. They're storytelling memory aids. They're navigational aids. In fact, that's a use of the stars that continues even to this day, not just on the Earth, but we even use the stars to navigate through space. And also, it turns out, there are some interesting artistic uses of constellations. Again, this is not a class necessarily for majors. I want to bring in a lot of aspects, for example, of astronomy that you're likely to encounter outside the, how shall we say, dry scientific aspects of it. Keep your eyes open for running into astronomical themes that may show up in some of the most unlikely places. And finally, if we have time at the end, because I've used up a bit of time going through our little tech demo today, we'll say a little bit about how the names of stars are given and a few of the bright star names and where the conventions come from for that. If I walked outside at night, now unfortunately we're in the 21st century, we're living in a fairly modestly sized urban area in the United States with lots of street lights. Most people don't get to see the night sky the way it has been visible to most human beings who've lived on this planet through most of history. An interesting fact you may know, I believe it corresponds to people living in North America and Europe, but it may in fact refer to most of the world. Only 1 in 5 individuals alive today has ever actually seen the Milky Way with the naked eye. If I were to go back 100 years or maybe 200 years, that fraction would be close to 100%. If I go back to 1,000 years, that fraction is certainly 100%. And the reason is simply that our modern technology and all of its benefits has a downside. We've lit the night and we've lost most of the stars. But if you go on a dark place on a dark moonless night and you spend over the course of a year, you can see approximately 6,000 stars if you were to move between northern and southern hemispheres. The 6,000 stars seems like a lot. Try to count up 6,000 of anything. 6,000 is close to the number of students, for example, in a single entering cohort at The Ohio State University. That's a lot of people. Think about 6,000 people all in a room. But that's nothing compared to the number of stars in our own Milky Way galaxy. The current accounting of stars in the Milky Way is something close to 200 billion stars. So we only begin to see, even with our naked eye, only a small bubble around the sun of what is actually a much more immense universe. The naked eye, while it is very powerful, as we'll see over the next few days, is nonetheless highly limiting. We're only seeing the tiniest, barest fraction of the universe. Now, if you look up at these stars and you spend some time out there, and I hope, in the summertime, the weather's even still good, if you can get out of town, go out to a nice dark place. One of my favorite things to do, even though I'm out working at a big observatory, if the weather isn't really cold, I don't like laying out in the cold, but if it's warm, I like going out and bringing out a lawn chair or an office chair and just getting out and start just looking up. It's one of the most beautiful things you think you can do is just look at a beautiful starry night sky. The human brain is a very interesting thing. We're hardwired to recognize faces. We're hardwired to recognize patterns. There's probably millions of years of evolution and height of this thing. It's like, I can eat that, that's going to eat me. It's kind of deeply hardwired in the reptile part of the brainstem. So one of the things we do is whenever you look at random patterns of things that have no order with them whatsoever, is the brain begins to sort them into patterns so it can recognize that part from that part over there. One of the things you do is like looking up at clouds and you see faces in the clouds. You don't have to be smoking anything to see faces in the clouds. It just naturally occurs to the human brain. People have done this with constellations. Every society we've ever encountered, whether they're literate or not, have applied names to the stars and have applied names to patterns of stars that fit certain pictures in their head. I've drawn here a very fanciful picture. This is from the late Renaissance, of a star map of the constellation of Ursa Major, the Big Dipper. It's one of the most familiar constellations in all the sky. We call these coming togethers of stars, these gatherings of stars into pictures and shapes, constellations. Now, there is no physical meaning behind a constellation. There's no reason why the Big Dipper has to be there for a physical reason. It is simply an accident of which stars happen to be in that part of the sky at once. But because they're so easily recognizable, they become signposts to us. Just like when you walk down the street, there's no reason that tree should be there versus another one, but they become the landmarks you use so you know as you're walking to and from school, you know roughly where you are, even if you don't have a detailed map or a GPS receiver with you. So too it is with the constellations. There are landmarks in the sky. Everybody, as I said, every peoples we've ever run into have populated the sky with constellations. Here's some examples. This is one of the oldest known coherent constellation maps known. It's from the 1275 BC. It's an Egyptian rendering of the night sky from the tomb of Pharaoh Seti I. Actually, within this group, there are recognizable constellations. This is, in fact, Leo the lion, Taurus the bull. It's no accident that these are the same constellations the Egyptians have come down to us as through the Greek and Roman tradition. This is a man standing up with one arm raised and one arm out. That's Orion. These constellations are nearly 4,000 years old. Even if we go to peoples who had no contact with the Mediterranean world, here's a section of one of the few remaining codices of the Aztecs in Central America. This is from 1300 AD. This is now a much more fanciful depiction of the Pleiades, the seven sisters, a bright grouping of stars. It actually is, in fact, a physical grouping of stars near the constellation of Taurus, as seen in the night sky. It's often a test of acuity of eyesight if you can see all seven stars within the Pleiades of the seven sisters. And this is actually from one of the few surviving Aztec codices. These words that you see are not actually Aztec, they're actually Spanish scribblings in the margins as the Spaniards tried to make sense of this. The Aztecs did not have a written script language like is shown here. The Chinese have some of the most extensive star charts that we have coming down from very ancient antiquity. Here's one from the Tang Dynasty in the 7th century AD. It's a very famous chart known as the Dunhuang chart. This is actually a very nice chart from the British Library. The Chinese had extremely complicated constellations, sometimes made up of many tens or even hundreds of stars, and yet even in this constellation, if you stare at it for just a second, oh look, there's the Big Dipper. There's a part of the Little Dipper. This is actually the constellations around the northern pole of the sky. So even in this chart, which is from the 7th century AD, with even a slight knowledge of the night sky, you can actually see that it's not just simply a fanciful or representational view of the sky. It's a working map. The proportions are about right. The size of each dot is not exactly proportional to the brightness of the star, but the positions are right enough you can recognize the pattern immediately. This Big Dipper pattern is an extremely famous one to those peoples who live in the northern hemisphere. It's so famous, in fact, that it shows up in places you might not even expect. For example, slaves in the southern United States before the Civil War, escaping from slavery into the northern states, would follow along a line of paths through the countryside known as the Underground Railroad. A lot of those stations in the Underground Railroad came up from Kentucky through Ohio, actually through portions of where we are today. One of the instructions that were given to the slaves, remember, they couldn't read and write for the most part, was they were told which side of the river to keep on and to, quote, follow the drinking gourd. The white slave owner, what the hell does that mean? The drinking gourd was the African name for the constellation of the Big Dipper, which points out north on the compass. So therein lies the use of these things. A very recognizable thing can be used as a navigation aid. It's something that everyone can see from everywhere in the sky, and it can transcend culture because everyone sees the same sky. So these figures in the sky are composed typically of bright stars that stand out from other things. And there's some common features we can see among the various constellations. One of them is that the really famous constellations look a lot like what they're named for. Now, I will be the first one to tell you that I cannot really see a bear in the Big Dipper. I can see a long-handled ladle or maybe a plow with an armature on it. But you have to look kind of carefully at all the fainter stars before you kind of see, oh, there's the body of the bear, the tail, the snout, and so forth. But some constellations really look like what they are. One of my favorite, of course, is the constellation of Scorpius in the summer sky. There's an arc of bright stars that really do look like the curved tail of a scorpion. Bright stars make up the main body, and there's pairs of stars that look like the claws of the scorpion coming out. If you learn how to spot the scorpion in the summer sky, it's amazingly, oh yeah, that's a scorpion. It's not surprising that that combination of stars has been called a scorpion by every people that has either been a desert dweller or has dwelled in an area dry enough to have scorpions as part of the local fauna. So too with a reclining lion is Leo the lion, the constellation. Now, even people who are very widely separated in distance, remember a long time ago, before modern age, you only traveled in your lifetime pretty much as far as your feet could carry you, unless you were in a technological civilization that had ships or something else. But it's surprising how cultures which have been separated not only by immense distances of space on the Earth, but immense gulfs of time, civilizations which have come and gone with no possible contact with another civilization in a different part of the Earth, but which saw the same general hemisphere of the sky, had exactly the same constellations. Now, some crazy people have said, oh, this means that visitors from outer space visited both peoples and taught one or the other things. I have no use for such ideas. That's the intellectual equivalent of grave robbing. It also lacks complete imagination on the part of the people with the idea. Of course they see the same things. Come on, everyone. If the Earth rotates around once every 24 hours, we all see the same sky. And the sky doesn't change all that much even over millennia. So, for example, there are lots of repeating themes that we see, culture after culture, place after place. Orion is depicted, for example, as a human male in just about every single culture we know, because it looks kind of like a guy with an arm raised about ready to bash something. That seems to be another constant of human history. Some guy with something in their hand about to bash something. Shows up in the sky. Scorpius, for example, as I've just mentioned, it shows up in all the desert peoples, call it a scorpion. And then there are long chains of stars that seem to sort of meander across the sky. Some people have called those giant celestial rivers. Other people have seen giant celestial snakes or dragons or other long, thin, serpentine creatures. So a lot of commonality among these constellation figures. Let's just pick one example, Orion. Winter's coming up here. Hopefully not too soon. I actually like the warm weather. But pretty soon we're going to be able to see the constellation of Orion coming into the night sky, as will be through most of the season. And I stole this from a lecture I gave during winter quarter, because it says visible in the east after sunset tonight. How about visible in the east towards morning? It's almost always seen as a human figure, right? There's the belt, the head, the raised club. In this case, this is the Western Greek version of it, got a shield and a pair of legs. We've seen this depiction over and over again. In fact, it shows up in a surprising number of places. The man with a raised arm is a theme that can be shown over 5,000 years of art in the West. Here's the Flamsteed Atlas Celeste from Paris in 1766, showing the classical mythological creature of Orion about ready to do a number on the head of Taurus there with his club, the belt and the stars. An Egyptian papyrus from the 13th century BC, and one of the oldest depictions we know of Orion from 3200 BC, the Palette of Narmer. It's an identical presentation. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt liked to have themselves presented as the celestial man, perhaps to show their connection with the gods, that they were themselves not of this earth but also of the celestial realm. And they chose as part of that depiction a constellation that is as visible to us today in the 21st century as it was in the 3rd millennium BC and even before that. Simply a random collection of bright stars that just happens to look like a human being. Now, when we start talking about constellations in astronomy, we're going to be really dealing with what we'll call the classical constellations. This is going to be obviously have a northern hemisphere bias, because most of the knowledge we have comes from largely the Mediterranean and its surroundings. We don't actually have a lot of contact before the last few centuries with civilizations or even with the southern hemisphere of the Earth. The oldest constellations that we know of appear in cuneiform tablets, along with the earliest examples of writing in around the year 3000 BC. The Palette of Narmer is an example of a non-written record, but still nonetheless a depiction we can recognize. A Greek astronomer who we're going to meet in a couple of weeks, Claudius Ptolemy, who lived in the 1st and 2nd century AD, made a catalog of the constellations of his time that was then passed down through the Middle Ages and Renaissance and became the basis of the modern set of Northern Hemisphere constellations. He identified what are called the 48 classical constellations. They are all figures from Greek and Roman mythology, even like Orion, for example, is a story in mythology. In fact, some people think that the transmission goes both ways. In some places, you took a mythological figure and you found a set of stars that looked like that, and you associated those stars with that mythological figure. But there are others who speculate that some of the figures in the sky started out as celestial figures, and the mythologies were born of adding stories to those stars, not the other way around. Now, all of these 48 classical constellations are those that are visible from the middle latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere. So the 48 classical constellations are the ones that you will see if you go out over the course of a year at nighttime here at about latitude 40 degrees north. These make up the classical 48 constellations. The oldest depiction we know of these classical constellations comes in a very unusual place. It's believed by many that this beautiful statue, it's actually a Roman statue. Actually, it's probably a Greek statue which was stolen by the Romans, and the Romans kind of was unearthed during the late Renaissance and ended up in the Farnese Palace in Rome. This is called the Farnese Atlas. It's the mythological figure of Atlas bearing the earth upon his shoulders. But if you look carefully at the earth, it's not the earth he's bearing up. Remember, Atlas didn't hold up the earth. Atlas held the sky above the earth in the story. So if you look carefully at the sphere on Atlas's shoulder, it's not the Earth, it's a map of the nighttime sky. And the positions of some of the stars and the relation of the constellations are, in fact, one of the earliest depictions, perhaps from an atlas by a man by the name of Arato, of the 48 classical constellations. But the 16th and 18th centuries, with the development of shipborne travel over long distances, Europeans began to travel out from the middle latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere into the rest of the world, and they began to get into the Southern Hemisphere. As they got into the Southern Hemisphere, they began to see the sky that you cannot see from the middle latitudes of the North. And so there, too, they didn't have any classical models to fall back upon, so they began to populate the sky in the south by making up brand new constellations. And over the course of time, they made up many tens to, in many cases, 100 or more constellations. The map makers, starting in pretty much in the 16th through the 18th centuries, invented brand new constellations, the first new inventions in the West since classical times. And they mixed up different themes. They didn't just simply draw from the mythology of the time. They also drew from biblical themes. They drew from modern themes. There are constellations, for examples, of air pumps, which are obviously not a classical structure, showing up in the nighttime sky in the southern hemisphere. At one time, this was like a completely open, free association game, and there were no rules, and there was no governing body to decide which constellations were going to work or not. So different people's atlases would have different mixes of different constellations, and everyone was vying to fill every little gap in the sky, no matter how improbable, with a constellation. Some of those atlases get up to 150 constellations. Many of them totally defunct now. We don't use them anymore. And this stuff all sorted itself out. Finally, in the 19th century, we ended up with the final official 88 constellations. The astronomers stepped in 1888 and said, okay, time out, enough. Let's get together. We've just founded this brand new International Astronomical Union as an international body to decide the names of planets and minor bodies and moons. Why don't we also decide on a common convention for sectoring up the sky into constellations for the use of giving designations to the names of stars and things like that? And out of that 1888 convention came, interestingly, the 88 official constellations that we now use in the nighttime sky. A lot was gained by this. There was standardization. Standardization is always good, but some things were lost as well. One of the things that was lost was Felis the cat. Now, I don't know how you feel on the pet zone, whether you're a dog, cat, iguana person, but my wife's a serious cat person, and she's always been upset by the fact that there are lots of dogs in the constellations, but there are no cats. Well, apparently, a number of other people have felt that same way, that there should be a place for Muggy in the sky, and so they chose this constellation Felis, which was big in the 19th century. This is a copy from an 1822 star atlas that happens to actually be an actual plate from 1822. I bought it as a present for my wife, then girlfriend at the time, because she was really big on the Felis constellation. I actually found this in an old map store. I've tried to look for the constellation of Felis in the sky. Most of these stars are fainter than can be seen by the naked eye. This is one of the reasons why these new extra constellations never caught on. You couldn't really see them unless you knew where to look, and I don't know about you, but that doesn't look like any reclining cat I've ever seen. One of the rules for a good constellation turns out to be it should kind of remind you of something. That does not remind me of my cat, for example. So this is one of the reasons why some of the constellations went defunct. They weren't good mnemonics. The most extreme example of that comes to us from the year 1627. Julius Schiller, who was an astronomer and churchman in Augsburg, Germany, got together with Johann Bayer, who was one of the best astronomers of the day, put together a star atlas, which was one of the most accurate star atlases made during 1627. This is just on the cusp between Copernicus and Newton. So all these stars' positions here and their relative brightnesses are really, really good. We can recognize the sky immediately. But Julius was a hardcore Protestant, and he was very, very offended by the fact that our sky was populated with pagan figures. And he felt the sky should be repopulated with Christian figures. So he renamed the 12 constellations of the zodiac for the 12 apostles, put figures from the New Testament into the northern hemisphere, figures from the Old Testament into the southern hemisphere, and repopulated the sky into a book called the Caelum Stellatium Christianum of 1627. Here's an example. This is the constellation of St. Helen and the True Cross, which is the classical constellation of Cygnus the Swan. So this one is where he took basically a classical constellation, more or less whole cloth, the so-called Summer Cross, but he turned it into, because it is a fact, a cross-like configuration of stars, he turned it into St. Helen of the True Cross. These never caught on. And the reason they never caught on is, ask yourself this question. How can you tell the difference between St. Luke and St. Mark? Bearded guy in a toga holding a book. That's good. The reason they didn't catch on is because there isn't enough diversity in these characters, which are mostly human characters. Okay, you got an ark, you maybe got, let's see, there's the basket, some basket there. I'm not sure which one. I think I made the one basket, the manger scene or something like that. This is Northern Hemisphere. Well, that's not a very mnemonic thing. You can't look at that and say, that looks like what it is. That's why it never caught on. It wasn't useful as an aid to, oh yeah, that set of stars there looks like a scorpion. That must be Scorpius. Oh, that's south now. Oh, there's the Big Dipper there. Oh yeah, that's north. There's a use to the shape of the constellation that people forgot when they began their repopulation of the sky. So now we get into the question of what people use these constellations for. Why the 88 that we've got, or at least the 48 classical constellations exist as they do. One of their roles was just that. They were mnemonics. They're memory aids. And they're often used in storytelling, right? They're celestial cheat sheets. Remember, entertainment in the days before plasma TVs and stuff like that was you went outside and you listened to stories around the fire. Maybe on a summer's night you would stand outside and the local storyteller would come up and tell some of the great stories of the great culture heroes of, maybe you're a Xhosa tribe in Africa, who knows, maybe you're a Greek citizen of Athens in the 4th century BC. You would hear those stories and they would use the sky to illustrate those stories because there would be the mythological characters of that story there, writ large in the night sky. That's why these figures are often of cult heroes or deities or various other mythological creatures like Pegasus, the winged horse. They also could take on religious and ritual uses. For example, the use of constellations to find times and reckon time were used by the Lakota Sioux of the plains of North America to develop their sacred hoop ceremonial sites. If you just simply look at it during the daytime, you see random strips upon the ground. If you look at it at night over the course of the year, those strips point in very specific celestial directions. Looking at celestial alignments of buildings, the Egyptians lined their buildings up with the sky because they wanted their great temples to be aligned with the realm of the gods. The Maya did this. The Aztecs did this. We can find celestial alignments throughout the ancient world. Going one step further, the people of the Inca in South America actually laid out the administrative organization of their entire empire as a reflection of the heavens. They wanted to have the administrative use of the land showing to have a celestial approval. They laid it out on celestial forms, in this case not based on constellations, but based on the annual appearance of the bright band of the Milky Way across the Andean sky. So here's some examples of some of these themes. Here are the constellations up on the left of Andromeda, a woman, Pegasus, the winged horse, Cassiopeia, the queen, Cepheus, the queen, and Perseus, the hero, about to bash the great dragon who's hiding up in here somewhere. And of course, here's a nice actually sort of I think this is a 17th century fanciful painting of this. There's, of course, Andromeda. There's always got to be excuse for drawing some girl with her kit loose. The queen, the king, and of course Perseus and the winged horse. Now I look up at this and say, yeah, I see a winged horse, a young lady chained to a rock, a hero. And you do have to remind yourself that the Greeks were the first people to mass produce wine and experiment with mushrooms. Here's the Lakota medicine wheel up in Bighorn County, Wyoming. This also looks like, again, it's a round site, a couple of piles of rocks and some lines, but in fact this is laid out on strictly astronomical lines. The other thing we can use the stars for is as navigation aids. I've already alluded to that in the use of the Big Dipper, for example, by slaves escaping from the South before the Civil War. In fact, some of the stranger constellations of the sky that don't actually make sense to us sometimes actually have their origins as navigational aids. For example, I've already mentioned Ursa Major. The Big Dipper is a way to find north. My father was a Marine. He was in Korea. That was one of the things he learned was how to find north when, you don't have a compass. All you got your rifle and your luck. Very good aid for finding north. If you're alone, you can always figure out where you are if you have a clear night sky. There's some other ones that really puzzled people. The faint constellation of Hydra. It doesn't really look like a water snake. It kind of lays in a funny direction on the sky. People thought, why has Hydra been such a common constellation for thousands of years? It makes no sense. until someone actually turned the clock back on that constellation to 4000 BC using a computer and realized that those stars in the year 4000 BC, taking into account some complex motions of the Earth, actually drew a nearly perfect east-west line above the Mediterranean sky. The Minoans were the first seafarers of the Mediterranean world. The constellation of Hydra appeared in the summer. It was their roadmap. It was their east-west along the long axis of the Mediterranean. Because the Minoans were able to basically conquer the use of celestial navigation, they were the first open water sailors of known history. So celestial navigation is an ancient practice. In fact, it goes back to some of the most ancient mariners in the world. The most sophisticated celestial navigation system is that employed by the Polynesian islanders of the Pacific. Take a look at a map sometime. Look at the Polynesian islands, every single one of which, except for some real rocks, are inhabited by people. They're thousands of miles apart among an open, trackless ocean. How in the world did they not only get to those things by small ships no bigger than giant canoes, but have trade networks among them? They had no compass. They had an amazingly sophisticated celestial navigation system. Their constellations laid out and told them where they were and where to sail for how long, and you could sail between literally two rocks in the middle of a trackless ocean. It's amazing what you can do because the map is above you, not below you. Here's an example of sort of the technologization of those celestial aids. This is a beautiful astrolabe, basically a way to read the stars and quantify the positions of the stars for navigation. This is actually an 11th century Iranian astrolabe. And finally, there is the position of what we'll call high art, or because it looks cool. A lot of constellations turn out to have an aesthetic purpose. Often they look like what they are. People just sort of got pleasure out of sitting out and watching. Say, wow, that looks really cool. And as a consequence, some of these constellations show up in art and literature. For example, the Egyptian and Maya decorated sky vaults on the inside of their buildings as if they were bringing into the inner part of their tomb. They were bringing some of the night sky inside and painting it on the vaulted arch of their roof. Lest you think this is simply to the mythology of ancient peoples, ornate Renaissance decorative sky atlases appear throughout the art of Europe. In fact, they show up in some amazing places, even including the domes and apses of churches. And celestial themes have even worked their way somewhat fitfully into modern art. It's kind of a fun game to play when you're looking at art, and you're usually looking at the usual stuff in an art history way. Keep your eyes open to the astronomical themes that have creeped in. Remember, up to about 100 or so years ago, the night sky was one of the most common aesthetic experiences of anyone who walked out at night. Not so true here in the 20th and 21st century because of urban streetlights. Some examples. Some are merely decorative. They have a little bit of accuracy to them. You can recognize the constellations kind of in the gold leaf stars here. This is actually a fresco in the Via Farnese. It was made, called the Caprarola fresco. It was made by an anonymous artist in the year 1575. It shows most of the constellations that would have been visible from the northern hemisphere in the 16th century, and it's semi-accurate. We can recognize the patterns of stars, but it's not meant to be high accuracy. Much more surprising is this star map. I apologize for the low contrast. It's the best picture I can find. It's in the old sacristy of the Church of San Lorenzo in Florence, and Brunelleschi's little miniature dome in the old sacristy off to one side. It was made in the year 1422. Now you look at this and say, well, okay, you got to ignore the Institute of the History of the Sciences from Florence. They watermarked this for us so they know who got the picture from them. Here are the familiar constellations. This is the band of the zodiac. There's the sun, the moon, the constellation of Taurus, and there's a couple planets in there. This is no mere decoration. The star positions and their relative brightnesses are of very high precision, and in fact, I'm going to bring back this picture later in the class, the position of the sun, moon, and planets actually allows us to date this scene of an actual night sky to the very day. So it isn't just simply art. There's some real science hiding deep inside of that. Bringing ourselves more to the modern age, we don't always have so much a representational view of the night sky, but here is Vincent van Gogh's very famous painting, Starry Night of 1889, a view out the window in Arles. Vincent was unfortunately mentally ill. This kind of translated a bit into some of his art, But in fact, some of the patternings of stars here do in fact match patterns of constellations in the appearance of the night sky. And then, of course, there's Joan Mirau's 1941 painting, The Loving Figures and Constellations of a Woman. There's dots connected with lines. And there's an eye. There may be a woman in there. I don't know. Okay. So constellations have many uses. Now, star names, the brightest stars all have proper names in the sky. We're not going to go into or memorize any of these star names in this class. There's really no point in that in a class like this. But I do want to mention that if you look at the groups of star names that are in the sky, they carry with them a very complex history hiding in those names. If you lay out the history of the names, you lay out the history of the transmission of knowledge in the West, from the Mesopotamians to the first constellations to today, we can find, for example, that most of the stars have Arabic names. So even though they are Mediterranean in origin, they passed through Islamic hands in the Middle Ages before they entered into Renaissance Europe. And the Islamic world left their notes on them. When you hear the star Aldebaran, that is an Arabic word, not a Greek word. Most of the star names in the sky are Arabic. So one of the things we're going to be seeing in this class, I said a major theme is, where does our knowledge come from? Sometimes it has come from some very surprising pathways. Any questions from anybody? All right, have a good weekend. We'll see you all on Monday. Monday, 2007, September 24th. Today is Lecture 4, Measuring the Earth. Well, last time on Friday, I gave a lecture on constellations. And to tell you the truth, constellations is one of those topics that's kind of cool, but you don't know where it's going to fit. So today we're going to really start in the discovery of what do we know about the sky, what do we know about the Earth. And we're going to start out at home. Oops, wrong button. We're going to start out by asking a very basic question. By how do we go about measuring the Earth? So the key ideas that I want to cover today are as follows. The first is I want to just review some ancient ideas about the Earth because they are somewhat informative about this whole process of how we begin to become conscious of the physical size of the Earth. And then go on to the concept of a spherical Earth, which actually began as an appeal to perfect symmetry by the Greeks in the 5th century BC, but actually was demonstrated physically by Aristotle in the 4th century. And we'll see what that's about and how you can actually see, with no instruments, no long-range travel, just standing still and paying attention, that you can actually see that the Earth and prove that the Earth is a sphere. You can demonstrate that it's the shape it has to have. And then finally, once you've established the shape of the Earth, how do we go about measuring its circumference? How do you pull that trick off? We're going to see two such measurements from antiquity that are greatly influential, that of Eratosthenes of Cyrene in the 3rd century BC, and that of Claudius Ptolemy in the 1st century AD. So we're going to introduce the idea of what is the size and shape of the Earth, and how do we measure it? Now, the most common theme we see all throughout ancient literature and ancient legends, and certainly in what I would call pre-literate peoples around the world, is the idea that the world is flat. Sometimes it's flat, surrounded by a world ocean, and surmounted by a hemispherical sky. This is not to say this in a way to make fun of people for having this view, because that, in fact, is how the world actually looks to us if we stand on a relatively high place in one spot and look around us. Go to the highest building in Columbus, it's pretty flat around here, and look around you. You see the land stretching out in all directions, pretty much equidistant away from you, and that land would run out when you reach the sea in most places, or run into Lake Erie in our case. And the sky really does appear to be a hemispherical dome just out of our reach, above our heads. Now, part of this is a bit of an illusion of perspective because we happen to be very small and the Earth and sky are very, very big. But it is the natural view you would come to for the Earth if you stayed in one place and just made a single instantaneous observation about the world. And we see this particular way of viewing the world all over the place through history. For example, Homeric Greece, which is getting back into kind of 8th, 9th century BC, that particular literature views the world as a completely flat disk surrounded by a world ocean. There's a grand dome of the sky being held up by the god Atlas. Well, we don't have to stick to Greek mythology. The Inca of Peru and South America called their nation not Peru. In fact, we really don't know where the word Peru comes from at all. They called themselves Tawantinsuyu, which in their language means the 4 quarters of the earth. They actually saw the earth as somewhat flat, a somewhat surprising result given that their empire stretched over many degrees of latitude, and they divided their empire, which was kind of long and thin, into 4 quarters, which mimicked the fourfold division of the sky by the Milky Way galaxy as it courses through the course of the year. And they set up their administrative structure on the ground to reflect what they saw in the heavens. The ancient Egyptians also saw the earth as flat. The ancient Egyptians did not really go all that far from their own homelands. They didn't really need to. They saw the sky as kind of metaphorically as a tent canopy that was stretched out between the mountains that lived at the 4 corners of the earth. This theme, the 4 corners of the earth, is an extremely common one that appears throughout history. Here's a modern reconstruction of the world according to Homer. They certainly knew about the Mediterranean Sea. You can see the Italy and Greece in here, the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Maybe you got as far as the Indus River and just dipping down the Nile and what we now call the Arabian Gulf, but really stopped from probing any further south by the burning sands of the Sahara. And in northern Europe, not very far did they get into northern Europe. You don't even see Britain or Ireland up here on the mountains. In fact, the idea of Spain doesn't really fit. And of course, the northern limits were simply as far as travelers had gotten and actually survived to return to tell the tale, which was not very far in the 8th and 9th centuries BC. This is a Hindu picture of the world. It comes from the Vedas. It's another way of looking at the earth as a flattened disk surrounded by an immense ocean. At the center of that earth is the giant Mount Meru, which holds up the entire sky, here shown fancifully as a cobra surmounting the sky. And then the earth, of course, is known to move and shudder as there are earthquakes in the Himalayan mountain areas. And so they saw the earth as being held up on its 4 corners by 4 elephants, right, with the earth riding on its back. And then those elephants themselves were on the back of a gigantic turtle which swam in an infinite sea. Now, do people really think the world looks this way? Probably not. After all, the world looks like pretty much as it is. So what we're really seeing here is a lot of the use of myth and metaphor. The earth is very big. We're very small. It's very hard to understand the natural world, and so people have made up legends and metaphors to try to make the world understandable to us. Some of those myths and metaphors are informed by a cultural or even a personal aesthetic that we can only guess at the remove, either of just cultural remove or at a remove of many millennia of time. So we see these as people struggling to understand the world around them. And they did so by bringing in their own views of things. But there's a different way of viewing the world that you can begin to come to, and that we saw coming in over time, particularly in this marvelous efflorescence of knowledge that occurred in classical Greece around the 5th century BC. There, certainly, they would apply myth and metaphor to their world, but they did something else which was somewhat unique to other peoples. They began to not only impose their ideas of what our view looks like upon the world, how the world ought to be, but also began to turn that question around and say, how is the world as it is, and how does that inform my views of it? And it was that reversal of that thought that really is a tremendous intellectual change in mankind. Now, the ancient Greeks really stood out for a number of reasons, but one of them is that they were intoxicated by geometry. Now, everybody knew geometry up to this point. The Babylonians used geometry. The Egyptians most certainly used a very sophisticated geometry. But to those peoples, as near as we can tell, there were abstract uses of geometry, but it was largely seen as an application. It was applied to building buildings, laying out ground, and so forth. It was really the Greeks who began to look at geometry and see that underlying all the apparent chaos of the world was this wonderful, orderly system of rules that could describe most geometric shapes. And they found those geometric shapes everywhere in the world. And they really came to this realization that, hey, maybe what we're seeing is we're getting to read deeply into the book of how the world was put together. Maybe geometry is part of the language of the universe, the language of the cosmos, the everything that the Greeks looked at. If you look at geometry, there is one perfect solid in geometry, and it's the sphere. Now, I will confess that this is a somewhat imperfect sphere. It's an inflatable sphere, just for size. But a sphere is that geometric solid in which I pick a single point in space and I draw out the surface that represents all points that are equal distant from that one central reference point. And no matter which direction I look at that sphere, it always looks the same. There are no faces to a sphere. There is no axis of symmetry to a sphere. It is one and whole and perfect, the most perfect geometric solid you can imagine. And the Greeks were so jazzed by this, they began to think that maybe this perfection in the sphere would find its reflection in some perfection in the cosmos, and it became fairly natural to begin to apply that to the shape of the Earth itself. In about 500 BC, Pythagoras, that same Pythagoras, the philosopher who gave us, for example, the Pythagorean theorem, and an entire school whose philosophy in many ways was devoted to numbers and harmony and geometry, proposed that the Earth must be a sphere, but as near as we can tell, he did so on purely aesthetic grounds. The Earth is immense. The Earth is the center of the universe. The Earth must have underlying it geometric perfection. And what is the most perfect geometric solid? The sphere. So without any other knowledge that we are aware of, Pythagoras declared that the Earth must be a sphere. And he did so on largely aesthetic grounds because of this conception of geometric perfection. By 400 BC, Plato, in his dialogue, the Phaedra, espoused a spherical Earth as well. And again, it was an appeal to symmetry, it was an appeal to harmony, it was an appeal to geometric perfection. But to all of our knowledge, Plato had no physical basis upon which to say for sure that the Earth was a sphere. So here again we see the imposition of myth and metaphor. One has a cultural or an aesthetic conception of what constitutes perfection in the world, and you simply impose that upon the world because that's how it ought to be. But what we really like to know is, can I prove it? Can I turn the question around and say, is the Earth indeed a sphere? Well, for that, we have to now go forward into the 4th century BC to one of the greatest philosophers of antiquity, Aristotle. Aristotle proposed a spherical Earth on geometric grounds. He shared this general aesthetic that he inherited from Plato and Pythagoras and all those who came before him, but Aristotle went one step further. Aristotle backed up that assertion by citing physical evidence to demonstrate that the Earth was indeed a sphere. Now we know from his writings that have survived that he put forward 3 basic pieces of evidence. They are that people living in the southern portions of the world, those portions visited by Greek trade, see the southern constellations appear higher above their local horizon than persons living in the north. So as you moved from north to south, you saw a different part of the sky, as if you were standing on the surface of a spherical solid. The second proof is the most dramatic of these. If you observe a lunar eclipse, and the next visible lunar eclipse from Columbus will be next March, if you watch it through the many hours of that total eclipse of the moon, you actually can see that the shadow of the Earth that the moon is passing behind has a beautiful curve to it. It's actually just stone obvious. We wonder why anyone didn't notice this before, or at least write it down. And finally, third, he made an interesting argument. This is not an observation now. It's rather a conception about how Aristotle viewed the world coming together physically. He began to ask this question, how do you make the world? And if he assumed that the Earth was made of that element, earth, the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, of that, the heaviest element was the earth. All earth settles down towards the middle. You pile anything up, it settles down into an ultimate state of rest. So Aristotle said, what if you assembled all the matter that makes up the earth from individual small pieces? How will it form itself under this impression to rest, has come to rest at the center of the universe? And he said that if you took that matter and allowed it to settle naturally into the vast bulk of the earth, that it should naturally settle itself into a spherical shape. It should assume the perfect geometric shape of the world. It's an interesting conception. It's halfway between coming up with a physical explanation for why it should be spherical and applying the aesthetic of a sphere as the most perfect ideal of the geometric solid. So Aristotle has got 1 foot in the ancient world of myth and metaphor and 1 foot becoming into the world of natural philosophy. Well, let's look at least the first. This one we can't say too much about. It's amazingly prescient. In fact, if you did take matter coalescing under its own self-gravity, it will naturally, in fact, form itself into a sphere. But Aristotle knew nothing about gravity. So here's a sketch. This is very hard to show in photographs. Take the constellation of Scorpius, a very distinctive constellation in the southern sky. It's down towards southern horizon in midsummer. If you were in Athens, Greece, at a latitude 38 degrees north, you would see that Scorpius barely gets its own length above the ground here. So here's the horizon looking due south in the middle of summer, and here's Scorpius, the hook of the tail, and moving up towards the claws of Scorpius. It's a very distinctive constellation. If, on the other hand, you traveled down to the first cataracts of the Nile, to a town down there called Syene, which is at latitude 24 degrees north in modern terminology, you would in fact see the constellation of Scorpius much higher in the sky. And you would begin to see other stars. For example, this small triangle of stars here that is completely always below your horizon as viewed from the position of Athens. So that you could see a different part of the sky. To Aristotle, that was you were standing on a spherical surface. If you start out here north in Athens, up here, I'm going to hold the Earth at an angle, and you march south, you see a different part of the sky appear to you as you move south, whereas at your northern horizon, you see stars fall below your horizon because I can't view through the north anymore. So it's an observation that requires you travel a significantly large distance, that the constellations move in the sky about their entire size. So you need to have a fairly dramatic demonstration of this. Here's a multiple exposure photograph of an eclipse, a total eclipse of the moon, where the moon is passing into the shadow of the Earth. And this shows very dramatically the curved shadow of the Earth here appearing as the moon hides behind it. Again, this is something which is actually very, very obvious and easy to observe, but you have to be very observant and watch it. And of course, the modern miracle of multi-exposure photography lays this all out for us in one instantaneous, dramatic way. This is an extremely dramatic demonstration of the sphericity of the Earth. A disk would not cause this. If the Earth was a disk, it would always have to be just contrived to just always hit things. So it was always seeing things face on. But a sphere, you never have to worry about that, because a sphere always projects to a circular cross-section no matter which direction you look from it. So you don't see sometimes a solar eclipse just being a little bit of a bite out of the moon. I'm sorry, a lunar eclipse, just a bite out of the moon. A lunar eclipse is always passing completely immersed into shadow, the shadow behind a solid sphere. These demonstrations were extremely compelling. We can see in the literature that survives to us, even up into the Middle Ages, certainly through the classical era, Aristotle's demonstrations were so compelling and so authoritative that the whole discussion of a flat Earth simply vanishes from the historical record in the 4th century BC. And all the way up through the fall of Rome, a spherical Earth was simply an assumption of all educated people. It was a manifest fact of the observed world. In fact, Aristotle went one step further and said that if you look at the shapes of the phases of the moon, which we'll be discussing at the end of the week, you could also demonstrate that the moon is itself a sphere. So therefore, if the Earth is a sphere and the moon is a sphere, then to Aristotle it stood by extension that a sphere is the fundamental geometry of the universe, the planets are spheres, the sun is a sphere. So we use that to say that noting this geometric perfection, we were reading something of the book of the universe. We were learning something about the laws that govern why the universe, why the cosmos are the way they are. This seems like a simple thing to us today, but remember, no one really had this concept before or was able to demonstrate it with such forcefulness before. And it's a very important idea, because it starts people thinking that the universe and all of its tremendous phenomena are, number one, they are understandable, and two, that the laws that govern the universe can be expressed in mathematical or geometric language. And that geometric language, if we learn the laws of geometry, we are, in effect, learning the laws of the cosmos. It's a very powerful concept. Now, having established its shape, how do we measure how big the Earth is? How big is the Earth? This is a challenge. It's a challenge because the Earth is vastly larger than any human being can traverse by themselves, even with appropriate technologies. It's hard to do in the 21st century AD, much less in the 3rd or 4th century BC. And it's a generic problem of measurement that we're going to run into all over the world, not only in geography, but in the solar system and in all the study of astronomy. How do you measure distances or measure the sizes of objects that are vastly larger than you are, or even your measuring machines, your measuring engines? How, for example, do I measure the height of a mountain that's too high to climb? How do I measure the Earth which is too big for me to just trail a string out behind me with a meter stick and just start counting up and walking. Eventually, I walk off the end of the land into the ocean, and that ends my measurement right there. Well, the answer to that challenge, the solution to the problem, is you apply the rules of geometry. And this, again, is one of the Greeks' big contributions to geometry, is they showed that all geometric figures that look alike are governed by the same rules independent of their size. The geometric rules that govern a sphere that I can pick up in the room are simply scaled up to that of the Earth. And so I can use the same geometric principles I work out on the small scale, and they simply scale up to the large scale. So I learn the rules of geometry for spheres. I take it from the observations that the Earth is a sphere, and I ask, what geometric data can I collect that will allow me to measure the size of the sphere of the Earth? So therein lies the problem. How do I measure the size of the sphere of the Earth? How do I measure the Earth's circumference without ever leaving home or only traveling a little bit? Well, the first person we know of who did this with any certainty in the historical record, and again here I have to be somewhat careful, the historical record is very, very spotty. A great deal was lost when the ancient world fell around 400 AD. Imagine almost all the literature that you know of, like Shakespeare, completely wiped out except for maybe one or two of the obscure plays and fragments of things called Hamlet, and maybe an article of someone describing having gone to a performance of Hamlet and loving it. But the play itself is gone, vanished from the record. Literally thousands of books, tremendous amounts of knowledge vanished with the fall of the Roman Empire. But a few things have managed to survive to us. One of those is Eratosthenes of Cyrene's measurement of the size of the Earth. It only survives to us in a second or maybe even third-hand account by the man by the name of Cleomedes, who probably lived somewhere between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD. And that tells you how tough the line of transmission was when we can't even tell you which century the guy whose second-hand story this is actually lived. But on to the story, some things of Eratosthenes have survived. He was born in Cyrene, which is now modern Shahat, Libya, up on the Mediterranean coast of modern Libya, in the year 276 BC. He was a man of the 3rd century BC, and he was the second librarian of Alexandria. Well, Alexandria, on the northern delta of the Nile, was the center of learning for the Mediterranean world up through Roman times.